Crimson soaked into the frost. Thousands lay dead in the snow. This wasn't just a battle. It was the chilling finale to a massacre beyond human comprehension. Coughing up mouthfuls of crimson, a raven-haired figure gasps for breath. His organs are shutting down. He knows. There's no bouncing back from this. His trembling fingers wrap around the glowing hilt protruding from his chest. The verdict is fatal. A radiant holy greatsword has pierced him right through the heart. Circling his crumbling form, a battered squad of holy knights heave heavy breaths. Their armor is shattered, but their cheers echo. They've finally slain the walking nightmare. To these bruised warriors, this skewered broken man is nothing less than the devil of the continent. But history will remember him as the supreme necromancer Archimonde, and somehow, even looking like a human pincushion, the bastard refuses to hit the dirt. Staring into the cold abyss of the afterlife, our anti-hero realizes the clock is ticking down to his final agonizing seconds. For 10 brutal, unrelenting years, he single-handedly orchestrated the Great Continental War against an unstoppable elite coalition. He forged fortresses from bone and shadow impenetrable walls that eventually shattered into absolute ruin, and that catastrophic defeat all orchestrated by one single champion. Burkle Rhineland, the absolute apex of the Northern and Night Order. He trudges through the crimson sludge, his blinding radiant blade humming with power. Halting right in front of his shattered nemesis, the imposing commander makes one thing crystal clear. He didn't pull off this miracle alone. He honors the endless mountains of corpses, the soldiers who bled, screamed and sacrificed everything just to give his sword an opening to pierce the darkness. Casting a massive shadow over the bleeding warlock, Burkle demands an immediate unconditional surrender. The realm he claims finally needs a lasting peace. That single self-righteous word snaps whatever sanity the dying villain has left. He spits blood, screaming at the golden boy to shut his damn mouth. With unholy wrath blazing from his one glowing eye, Archimonde shreds into their sickening hypocrisy. He's absolutely livid. Where were these righteous saviors when a catastrophic plague wiped out millions? But sure, now they want to stand on their soapboxes and preach about peace. Burkle absorbs the venom in dead, stony silence as the necromancer curses the entire holy vanguard to the deepest pits of hell, glaring with pure, unfiltered malice. The fallen sovereign refuses to just fade away. Coughing up black sludge, he forces his mangled, shattered body to siphon every last drop of surrounding shadow, channeling a violently crackling aura for one final apocalyptic nuke. The victorious paladins freeze, their blood turning to absolute ice. They are utterly blindsided. How is this even possible? This terrifying spike of mana is erupting from a corpse that should already be rotting. Raw panic violently ripples through the front lines. The troops suddenly realize the unthinkable. This madman is trying to trigger a forbidden death curse, right from his own grave. A terrified soldier shrieks to slice his head off immediately, but the stoic commander simply raises an armored hand, issuing a chillingly calm order to hold the line. The horrifying ghost of Archimonde's greatest atrocity crashes down on them. Burkle solemnly recalls the 20 million innocent plague victims, ruthlessly twisted into a mindless, rotting horde. Reliving that absolute nightmare flashes a gruesome decade of slaughter across the commander's eyes. But snapping back to the grim reality of the snow, Archimonde just violently grinds his teeth, completely scoffing at the hero's holier-than-thou lecture. With his spectral eye burning a hole straight through the night, the Dark Lord flips the script loudly, accusing this righteous savior of launching a global crusade for one petty reason: to avenge his own slaughtered hometown. Only the piercing, freezing wind dares to speak. Burkle stares down at the bleeding warlock, offering absolutely zero denial to the venomous accusation. But instead of biting back in anger, the unshakable champion finally shatters the tense silence. He softly admits there's only one genuine reason he dragged his army through literal hell, tightening his armored grip around his radiant hilt. The warlord declares that his absolute burning motivation for this 10-year bloodbath was simply to safeguard the fragile future of the next generation. That sickeningly selfless curveball of an answer hits our Dark Lord way harder than the holy steel in his chest. His glitching body instantly freezes in absolute paralyzing shock. Without a single trace of hatred in his voice, the Golden Knight digs deeper. He explains that his bloody sacrifices are simply a heavy legacy, a path cleared for the children. Hearing such nauseating, unwavering purity escaping the lips of his ultimate rival leaves the Shadow Monarch completely speechless. His twisted brain furiously short-circuits, completely unable to process the blinding contrast between their souls. Locked into Burkle's tranquil, ocean-deep gaze, Archimonde catches a terrifying glimpse of his own shattered, monstrous reflection, staring right back at him. As if on cue, the suffocating storm clouds rip open, aggressively bathing the grim slaughterhouse in piercing golden sunlight. Bathed in that sickeningly heroic halo, the stoic vanguard quietly repeats that every drop of spilled blood was for the youth, leaving our crushed anti-hero to brutally swallow the pill of how vastly alien their ideologies truly are. Drained of his dark mana and his fiery spite, and the warlock's indomitable spirit shatters into dust. His legs give out crashing hard onto his bloody kneecaps in the freezing frost, completely running on empty with zero tricks left up his sleeve. Our fallen tyrant slowly looks up at his executioner. He lets out a bitter laugh and casually demands the knight to just finish the damn job already. But instead of claiming the glorious final strike, the legendary hero does the unthinkable. He casually chucks his divine greatsword straight into a snowbank. The front line violently erupts into pure hysteria. But wait, the golden boy isn't giving up. He came equipped with a very specific, terrifying backup plan. The scabbard hisses as he draws a sinister, jagged broadsword, pulsing with venomous purple runic magic, aiming that cursed, ominous steel right between the necromancer's eyes. The towering paladin grants his hated enemy one final breath for some famous last words. But knowing our guy, he would rather swallow glass than bow out gracefully. The tyrant's glowing orb violently flares up. He flashes a bloody grin, dropping a chillingly cryptic threat that creatures like him never stay in the grave for long. But before he can even land the punchline of his epic villain monologue, the glowing runeblade violently severs his neck, launching his head into the sky amidst a massive erupting geyser of black blood. Boom, that colossal strike gouges a massive crater straight through the battlefield, and the remaining soldiers go completely ballistic, screaming in pure joy over the slaughter of the Oru, continent's most terrifying threat. Yet even as his decapitated head slams into the icy soil, his mind stubbornly clings to life just long enough to catch the agonizing sound of thousands cheering his execution. His vision fades into a narrow, suffocating sliver, watching the hero stroll away as he finally swallows the bitter truth. His 10-year empire of absolute dread is officially dead and buried. But instead of sinking into the eternal abyss, our villain's soul is violently launched through a blinding hyperspeed vortex of glowing energy, like he just got hurled down a trippy intergalactic waterslide. When this insane roller coaster finally screeches to a halt, his spirit gets violently spat out into a colossal, creepy gothic mansion, right dead in the center of a hilariously dramatic, pitch-black thunderstorm. Inside those gloomy walls, a couple of frantic maids are practically hyperventilating, all because the household's infant heir just pulled off an absolute miracle. He moved his tiny mouth. Powering up inside this squishy little flesh prison, our Dark Lord's epic comeback to the world of the living involves him gulping air like a clueless goldfish, while his stunned brain short-circuits with a massive, "What the heck?" Just as our guy is internally panicking, desperately trying to piece together where on Earth he ended up, one of the bubbly servants hovers over his fancy crib to announce his shiny new Respawn username, Young Master Klein. They gleefully shove a glittering painting of a stunning silver-haired lady right in his face, introducing the ultimate king of death to his brand new mommy. Trying to blend in, he attempts to speak, but this puny baby body is way too weak to channel his overwhelming sinister aura. Drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably, he pushes his fragile baby vocal cords to their absolute limit, just to squeeze out one tiny sound. The two caretakers totally flip out, practically buzzing with excitement as they brace themselves for his precious sweet first words. But instead of babbling a cute little mama, this absolute savage goes full boss mode, forcefully ordering his undead legions to crawl out of their graves. Hearing a squishy baby spit out a perfectly chanted dark magic spell leaves the terrified servants paralyzed with dread, letting their toys shatter on the floor. With perfect comedic timing, the heavens violently answer his command, ripping the sky apart with a blinding flash of blue lightning. A bone-chilling shriek tears through the rain-soaked courtyard, confirming that the toddler's very first necromancy trick was a horrifying absolute win. Flash forward 15 years later, and that creepy gothic manor is now soaking up some bright, gorgeous sunshine. Clustered together in the long corridor, a flock of giggling maids are totally hypnotized by a figure strolling by. We catch a flash of slick silver hair and a sharp tailored black suit smoothly drifting. Down the hall, enter the teenage version of Klein, looking like a walking piece of art and flexing an insane amount of main character vibes. The mansion's crew furiously gossip under their breath, completely spellbound by the kid's wildly gorgeous, picture-perfect face. Gliding through the manor, Klein plays it ice-cold perfectly, ignoring the blushing starry-eyed staff tracking his every single move. But right before he can soak in the glory, a heavy wooden bucket magically spawns dead center over his skull, instantly followed by a super sketchy hello. Garrison Veerman, a battle-scarred, unhinged holy man, ruthlessly empties a load of ice-cold water straight onto the kid's perfect hair, shrieking wildly about banishing foul demons. Glaring fiercely at his dripping wet target, Garrison narrows his crazy eyes, 100% positive that he just caught a flash of the legendary Death Lord's murderous intent hiding in those pupils. The mesmerized maids gasp in pure shock, while the priest arrogantly brags that his sneak attack splash was a sacred duty, saving them all from wicked hypnosis. Just standing there, with a literal bucket balancing on his noggin, Klein sarcastically asks if the old man ever gets bored of pulling these absurd, completely useless exorcism stunts year after year. Yet even with freezing drops sliding down his cheeks, the fanatic's wild claims actually strike a hidden nerve, shouting that the sinister spirit of the continent's most feared monster is secretly lurking inside this handsome teenager's body. Our boy tries to brush it off, but Garrison instantly draws a holy water spray bottle and blasts him right in the eyeballs, yelling that furious glare is all the evidence he needs. Swiping the stinging mist out of his eyes, our anti-hero genuinely starts wondering if this supposed man of God has completely fried his own brain. Deciding he absolutely does not have the time for this circus, he pivots on his heel and speed walks out of there, grumbling a filthy streak of curses under his breath. But there is no way Garrison is letting his prime suspect slip away that smoothly. Immediately barking fierce commands at two guards to hunt the drenched kid down. Sprinting across the open yard, our guy yells that his name is Klein, frantically, dodging the lunatic priest's threat of a mandatory bare-naked holy water scrub down. But even as he runs for his absolute life and dignity, his brain flashes back to the insane truth of his existence, confirming that he definitely met his brutal end at the edge of Berkel Rhineland's sword back in the day. That memory hits like a truck, waking up trapped in a tiny baby's body right after getting his head chopped off, only to accidentally drop a master tier curse for his very first sentence. Unsurprisingly, the normal adults didn't exactly click with a diaper-wearing infant hurling forbidden death magic. So, they labeled our boy an actual demon spawn and punted him straight to a strict monastery the very second he turned 3. Cue the creepy dark-tinted flashback filter as our tiny protagonist glances over his little shoulder straight into the... Dark's mind flashes back to the exact second he crossed paths with a shady guy parading around as a holy order priest. Looming in the doorway, Garrison Veerman cut a totally menacing figure, his radiant cross giving off absolute villain energy. Staring up at that violently scarred mug, our guy was completely clueless about the pure hell he was stepping into. Day 1 kicked off with a brutal 24-hour non-stop prayer marathon, screamed at such deafening volumes that the poor kid's eardrums literally started weeping blood. The next torture method on the itinerary was a sub-zero plunge pool, loaded with crushed garlic and ice chunks, leaving the pint-sized necromancer violently trembling just to stay alive. Things eventually dialed up to a blazing wooden cross, with the unhinged clergyman casually putting on a fiery purification spectacle while his helpless victim baked like a potato. Those agonizing shrieks for mercy rattled through the monastery grounds, violently yanking him right back to reality. Skip ahead 5 entire years, and we catch our totally drained protagonist slumped on the floor, currently sporting an incredibly goofy cone hat. Right by his side, his personal maid Erin drops to her knees in hardcore devotion, desperately praying for young Master Klein's health and vitality. While she aggressively belts out a full-blown Sunday Mass bro, just camps out in soulless silence, letting freezing water trickle down his absurd headgear. Reaching his absolute breaking point with his holy garbage, he aggressively snatches the cone off and yeets it straight across the room. That explosive temper tantrum leaves Erin visibly stunned as she softly murmurs that the weird little accessory was actually custom made by hand. Instantly feeling like total trash for ruining a sweet girl's DIY project, he awkwardly rubs the back of his neck and mumbles a genuine apology. He quickly stoops down to scoop up the tossed item to make things right. That is, until Erin casually drops the bomb that Priest Garrison was the actual mastermind behind the knitting. Pausing dead in his tracks, our guy's brain completely glitches out as he physically struggles to process the incredibly cursed mental picture of a massive muscle-bound priest delicately knitting a tiny party hat. The pure, unfiltered revulsion painted on Klein's face is priceless as he suddenly handles the basic knitwear like it is a ticking time bomb. Speak of the actual devil, massive stomps rattle the floorboards as Garrison himself kicks off a theatrical entrance dramatically dabbing away a totally phony tear. The emotionally manipulative holy dude whines that he burned an entire week carefully stitching that stupid little cone just for him. Without hesitating for a single second, our boy gleefully tears the cursed fabric straight down the middle, absolutely refusing to put that trash on his head. The vibe instantly spirals into a chaotic shouting match, with Garrison aggressively accusing him of hiding a demonic soul, while Klein screams for a total refund on his squandered guilt. Their unhinged squabbling violently halts when Captain Dunkel of the Red Chariot Knight Order politely bows his way into the chamber, casually checking if the intense purification ritual has wrapped up. Flashing a super awkward grin, the armored captain smoothly points out that the toxic rumors tying young Master Klein to the notorious necromancer are completely dead and buried. While Klein is violently mashing Garrison's scarred face with his bare hands, Dunkel casually mentions that the Holy Order itself officially wiped his record clean. Hearing this, Garrison instantly drops his victim flat on the hard floor, flipping a switch to play the role of a flawless, well-mannered saint. Sprawled out on the tiles, our bruised boy shoots pure daggers at the two guys, now chatting like old buddies. Utterly mind-blown by the priest's breathtakingly shameless two-faced act. Realizing this absolute psychopath is secretly a grandmaster at political kissing up, Klein just watches as Garrison finally declares he is heading out. But right before crossing the threshold, the scarred zealot freezes his entire vibe, turning terrifyingly serious. He casually drops an incredibly dark, thinly veiled threat about the lingering stench of hidden evil, leaving the undercover reincarnated necromancer absolutely sweating buckets. With that deeply unsettling warning just hovering in the tense air, the massive holy man spins on his heel to make a grand exit, but then popping his scarred face right back through the doorframe, Garrison overly cheerfully books their next brutal torture session for Friday, forcing a furious Klein to aggressively shoo him away. Back inside the lounge, a deeply exhausted Klein is left gasping for air as Garrison's thunderous booming laughter slowly fades down the corridor. Physically and mentally wiped from the chaos, Klein aggressively faceplants into the luxury sofa with a massive soul-crushing groan. Jolting back upright with his arms tightly folded, he loudly demands to know if that steroid-pumped lunatic is even legally permitted to call himself a man of God. Tossing him a dry towel, Aaron totally ignores his mental breakdown and shoots straight from the hip, bluntly asking if he really isn't the mythical dark sorcerer the rumors claim he is. Furiously waving her off, the young master aggressively shoots down the heavy accusation, vowing that he physically cringes just hearing that cursed title. But deep down in his core, he knows damn well that spilling the actual truth would buy him an instant one-way ticket straight back to the holy water waterboarding sessions. Even as he marinates in pure, unadulterated frustration, his brain gets violently yanked back to the gut-wrenching 7 years he rotted inside a monastery under intense 24/7 lockdown. Driven absolutely crazy by the suffocating reality of it all, our boy aggressively yanks at his own hair, while Dunkel casually drops the fact about Garrison holding the ultra-elite rank of proxy. Tilting her head in pure confusion, the nosy maid grills Dunkel on what the heck a proxy actually is, and if it means the beefy priest is some kind of VIP. Taking a quick breather, the armored captain thoughtfully strokes his chin, desperately trying to dumb down the church's insanely complicated power ladder. But even as the knight starts breaking it down, a shadow-drenched, terrifying visual of the scarred priest flashes across the screen, brutally proving that this elite rank is exclusively reserved for the absolute deadliest weapon in the Holy Order. The breakdown reveals a chilling reality. Unless stacked up against the freakishly powerful Dukes of House, Rhineland, a proxy is practically an unstoppable juggernaut. Huddling beneath his damp towel, Klein tunes in while Aaron happily hypes up just how insanely broken his family bloodline truly is. The reincarnated death mage goes completely rigid when the maid brightly wonders aloud who wears the crown as the mightiest duke in their entire history. Leaning in tight, Klein hangs on every word as the attendant proudly crowns the current 7th duke as the absolute apex predator. Slicing through the servant's dramatic hand gestures, Klein shoots down the very notion that his new old man takes the top spot. As the fiercest fighter around, without a single shred of doubt, our guy stakes his claim. He firmly declares the first duke as the unrivaled titan of their family tree. The bewildered servant just freezes, blinking in pure confusion, totally blindsided by the kid's burning devotion. Waving a white flag, the guy quickly nods along, while Aaron jokingly pokes fun, calling her young lord a massive superfan of the founder. She even highlights how he's been glaring holes into the guy's painting this entire time. But deep down, though, our boy is harboring pure hatred. Out of nowhere, the servant drops a colossal piece of lore, casually mentioning that exactly 200 years have passed since the dynasty first took root. 200 years. The crushing reality of that massive time jump slams into our reborn villain like a runaway freight train, eyes locked forward. He finally chokes down the bitter truth, forcefully accepting this totally absurd new timeline. A majestic gallery of ancient paintings sweeps across the screen, tracing the bloodline straight back to ground zero. And sitting right there at the genesis is the legendary First Duke Berkel Rhineland Nullen, draped in pristine, blindingly bright golden armor like a perfect hero. This triggers our boy to mentally unveil the cruelest plot twist of all. He just respawned as the blood relative of the exact same dude who slaughtered him in his past life. That traumatic flashback punches Klein right in the gut. Back in the day, he stood there utterly mangled, screaming his ultimate rival's name in pure, unfiltered agony. A blonde-haired paladin simply glared down at him, sickeningly calm, perfectly poised to deliver one last preachy monologue. With a single devastating slash, the holy sword ripped right through the dark mage's shields, permanently pulling the plug on his era of darkness. Snapping awake from the nightmare, Klein rockets up from his silk sheets, violently gasping for air. He just sits there, gripping the comforter lungs, burning, as he desperately tries to blink away the phantom agony of a blade slicing straight through his heart. Swiping the freezing sweat off his brow, our guy viciously curses the horrid dream, because deep down he is still Archimand, the infamous necromancer once dreaded as the continent's own personal devil. His memories aggressively drag him back to his former glory days, reliving how his explosive wrath nearly reduced the entire world to ash right before the northern Knight Berkel Rhineland finally struck him down. But the universe's sickest joke, waking up 200 years later, reborn straight into the family tree of the absolute bastard who took his head. Snapping back to reality, Klein viciously yanks at his silver hair in raw frustration, still completely grossed out by his own tiny new body. His solo pity party gets brutally interrupted when a gigantic shadowy figure blocks out, the doorway casually pointing out that the young lord is a pretty loud sleep talker. Stepping out of the shadows, Garrison flashes a wildly creepy grin, point-blank asking if Klein was dreaming about his glory days as the Dark Mage. Sweating bullets, our panicked hero immediately plays dumb, blaming it all on heavy fatigue. But Aaron randomly pops up right over his shoulder with the worst timing ever, eyes practically sparkling with manic hype. The hyperactive maid proudly declares that she caught every single syllable of his unhinged midnight rant. She literally reenacts his threats to burn down the continent and slaughter every living soul, dramatically waving her arms around. This throws a terrified Klein right into emergency damage control mode, all while the massive priest quietly observes the total circus playing out. Right before things crash and burn entirely, Butler Vermin raps on the doorframe, officially announcing a mandatory swordsmanship showcase. Meanwhile, Garrison coldly shoos the chatty maid away after pocketing her highly incriminating intel. The towering high priest's eyes flare up with a blinding, terrifying white light, brutally signaling that Klein's upcoming purification sessions are getting doubled. Freaking out, our hero desperately slaps his hand straight over Aaron's mouth before she can shovel his grave any deeper. As the camera pans out to the lavish, sunny estate, Klein is mentally screaming every curse word in the book at that religious fanatic. Marching down the crimson-carpeted corridors, the stressed young master grills the butler about this random massive shift in his daily routine. Vermin politely confirms the sudden event, dropping the heavy bombshell that His Grace the Duke himself personally demanded his son show up today. Hearing his new dad's title totally catches Klein off guard. But that tense vibe is instantly shattered when Aaron happily shoves a crackling snack pouch right into his face. Utterly exhausted, the elder butler harshly scolds the maid for acting so recklessly, but Klein just sighs and rips open the wrapper for her anyway. Watching the weirdly upbeat girl happily chow down our guy lets out a soft chuckle at the completely wholesome chaos, giving him a split-second break from his impending doom. Gazing up at the wildly expensive crystal chandelier, Klein pushes for the actual truth behind this highly unusual summons. Dropping his voice to a hushed whisper, the butler leaks the grim reality. The distant relatives from the branch families are swarming the manor. A heavy shadow washes across the reincarnated sorcerer's face as he pieces together how disastrous this could be for his already shaky position. The second his boots hit the polished floor of the main hall, a pack of arrogant aristocrats zeroes in on him from the balcony. Vicious gossip erupts instantly. These toxic blood relatives openly ridicule his past fantasies, sarcastically dubbing him Brother Archmage, while his maternal cousins waste zero breath-throwing cheap shots about him decaying inside some dusty monastery, playfully acting terrified of his dark hexes. Shifting his gaze to the northern faction, savagely tearing into roasted meat, Klein genuinely questions if these freeloaders just showed up for the all-you-can-eat buffet. Sweeping his gaze across the packed room, he pinpoints the western bloodline, but his vision zeroes in on one specific girl. Lounging in her seat with absolute authority, this icy cousin projects an aura completely detached from the rest of the peanut gallery. Yet just as he attempts to mentally map out the faction lines, the irritating chatter of his loudmouth kin drags him straight back to harsh reality. A golden-haired punk rocking a yellow vest actually possesses the sheer audacity to ask if our protagonist even shares the sacred Rhineland blood. That is the final straw. Klein whips his neck around, shooting a freezing death stare that immediately wipes away their arrogant smiles, firing right back at their own legitimacy to carry the crest. He could not care less about memorizing who they are, fully aware that these irrelevant side characters are only acting tough because the core family's foundation is currently falling apart. The mere fact they possess the guts to trash-talk a pureblood heir confirms his worst suspicions. This exact decline is perfectly mirrored by the violent clashing of steel ringing out from the practice arena. Down on the lavish combat tiles, an intense sparring session is reaching its boiling point. A violet-haired challenger furiously rains down heavy blows against a totally relaxed golden-haired defender. Putting his entire soul into every slash, the purple-haired fighter yells out in pure rage, calling out his rivals. Named Dellen, absolutely livid over being handled like a mere practice dummy. The quick-tempered assailant screams for his foe to stop playing games and engage him for real. Smoothly dodging a wild flurry of wooden blade attacks, Dellen coolly tells Dalton that this duel was decided before the first swing. Flashing an arrogant grin, Dellen preps his retaliation, while Klein observes the whole spectacle from the upper deck, acknowledging his sibling as the lone foundation, preventing their noble name from turning to dust. Our protagonist officially presents the absolute unit, Dellen Rhineland, the firstborn heir, a verified prodigy, and his senior half-brother. Seeing the intense energy erupt as the pair collides once more, the reborn magic caster confesses that if Dellen was not around, their elite legacy in the blade arts would be completely dead in the water. Rejecting the brutal truth, Dalton rushes forward for one last pathetic strike. His expression is contorted into an angry scream as he tries to rewrite his inevitable defeat. Igniting his radiant star-patterned irises, Klein gets ready to break down some high-tier combat for the very first occasion since taking over this new physical form. Dalton launches a reckless, max-effort lunge, yet the blonde phenom effortlessly glides around the incoming wood like time has literally frozen. Faster than the braggart can even process, Dellen bridges the gap, wrapped in a dazzling aura of golden light, freezing his challenger dead in his tracks. Observing from the high ground, our main character's mystical sight ramps up to maximum power, letting him capture every solitary micro-movement of the engagement. He immediately dissects the flawless physics behind his older sibling's stance, computing the absolute precision and kinetic energy of each step against the stone. Finally grasping that he has been utterly outclassed, Dalton jerks his face back in sheer terror, swearing under his breath at his rival's downright broken agility. Klein simultaneously monitors the exact current of magic pumping through Dellen's veins, immediately identifying the legendary hidden art of the Rhineland clan. Erupting with a blazing surge of power, Dellen executes the catastrophic meteor strike, violently obliterating Dalton's practice gear into millions of tiny sawdust pieces. Aiming his pristine sword straight at the throat of the broken branch relative, the triumphant firstborn formally calls the bout to a close. Sporting a highly satisfied smirk, he lightly points out his previous advice, reminding the loser that taking off the training wheels would strictly result in pure humiliation. High up in the gallery, the distant relatives are practically hyperventilating, dripping cold sweat as they witness Dellen perfectly pulling off such a high-tier skill in broad daylight. Our hero deduces that this entire one-sided massacre was a heavily orchestrated flex meant to force the side branches into submission. However, his deep tactical read gets violently interrupted when his mystic vision randomly glitches out. A few seconds pass, and a recognizable tone bounces off the brilliant crystal lights. Dellen calls out to Klein, trotting upwards with a beaming, warm grin. The older sibling jokingly chews out his little bro for creeping in to spectate the spar without, giving him a heads up. Scratching the back of his neck, Dellen shoots him a wildly confident smile. Klein secretly admits that his older brother is straight out of a textbook for the perfect flawless protagonist, but there's zero chance he's feeding that massive ego. Instead, our boy slaps on a totally deadpan expression. He fiercely pivots the conversation, demanding to know why the obnoxious Branch family decided to invade their turf. But before he can even finish cooking his relatives a booming voice shatters the tension from behind. The newcomer drops a colossal compliment on the golden boy. Enter Heinkel Rhineland, the seventh head of the family. Looking every inch the proud patriarch, he stares in absolute awe at his eldest son, mastering their secret arts. Acting like an excited puppy, Dylan sprints straight to his dad while Klein just stands frozen, mentally digesting the fact that this walking powerhouse is technically his flesh and blood father. Heinkel gazes down with that heavy, intense approval you only catch in high-stakes movies, praising his heir for grinding through the brutal hours required to reach this peak. Watching from the sidelines, our guy realizes something grim. In a clan that's slowly bleeding out its former glory, this blonde prodigy is essentially the old man's final shred of genuine pride. Even Dunkel, hovering nearby, absolutely has to chime in, hyping up the kid's insane mana control. He calls his raw talent flat-out terrifying. The golden boy, of course, plays the humble genius card to absolute perfection, scratching the back of his neck and claiming he's still got miles to go. That is right before his dad softly calls out his name. Forget a simple pat on the back. Heinkel drops a crushing load of ancestral pressure right on his shoulders, reciting the exact dying words of the monster who slaughtered our boy in his previous life. The first Duke, Berkel Rhineland, declaring that their knights must forever reign supreme in the Empire. He takes that legendary family motto straight to the core. The eldest son bows deeply. He soaks up the glorious praise like an absolute sponge. But this wholesome family bonding session violently crashes to a halt. The Duke slowly shifts his piercing gaze toward his other infinitely more problematic kid, caught completely off guard. Our hero turns to ice. A single drop of cold sweat betrays the reality he definitely was not prepared for a one-on-one showdown with the boss. Without uttering a single syllable, the towering patriarch extends a massive heavy hand, erasing the distance before Klein can even twitch. Planting his massive palm firmly on top of his son's head, Heinkel drops a nuclear-level buzzkill. He brutally points out that he still can't sense a single pathetic drop of mana inside the boy. Our guy instantly drops his eyes, muttering a strained apology. Inside, he's spiraling into a toxic pity party, realizing he is officially just a worthless deadweight. Because, let's be real, you can only shatter the hopes of someone who actually believed in you in the first place. Stepping up to bat, Dunkel scrambles to run damage control. He waves his hands frantically, trying to excuse Klein's magicless condition as the harsh result of spending his prime developmental years locked away in a dusty monastery. Sadly, the peanut gallery of haters is already having an absolute field day, whispering loud enough for the entire continent to hear that the second son is a massive, irredeemable failure. Heinkel tries pulling the supportive father card, vaguely mentioning that there are plenty of other paths in life. But the greedy Branch family members are already scheming. In the shadows, they're practically salivating over a hostile takeover. Honestly, our boy couldn't care less about being the star of their little roast session. He lets the personal insults bounce right off his armor. Instead, his mind violently drifts back to his ancient nemesis. What truly sets his blood on fire is the blatant disrespect toward Berkel's legacy. It makes him seriously question why his former murderer even wasted time protecting these ungrateful parasites. Once the toxic gossip train finally derails, the crowd scatters down the grand hallway, leaving our hero standing completely alone, looking like the pathetic punchline to a terrible joke. Naturally, the silence lasts for exactly 2 seconds. Then Dalton Cornwell struts into view, itching to kick the supposedly helpless young lord while he's in the dirt. Channeling some serious high school bully energy, Dalton brands him a total disgrace. He mocks Klein for acting all high and mighty when he possesses absolutely zero combat skills. Completely unbothered, our guy mentally opens Dalton's secret file. He fires right back casually, asking if making out with random girls behind the ballroom is the glorious new standard for family. Pride. That massive truth bomb instantly obliterates the bully's tough guy persona. He's left stuttering helplessly as our protagonist absolutely cooks him, mocking him for thinking a few cheap bribes could cover up his scandalous nightlife. Completely losing his mind, the Branch family brat charges forward in a blind rage, but he gets effortlessly tripped by a perfectly timed foot. Gravity takes over from there, sending the arrogant swordsman face first into the luxury marble tiles. With an insanely satisfying thud, he earns himself a fresh bloody nose. Dalton shrieks from the floor, while Klein casually strolls away. He accurately points out that this pathetic tantrum is just leftover salt from getting utterly humiliated by Dylan just moments ago. Desperate to get the last word, the shattered noble crosses an unforgivable line, screaming at the top of his lungs that the young master is nothing but a filthy bastard who doesn't even know his own mother. You can practically hear the final boss music kicking in. Our guy shoots him a bone-chilling side glare. His eye glows with a pure, menacing light as he dares the doll. Absolute idiot to repeat that little comment. Staring up from the cold floor, Dalton suddenly realizes exactly how badly he just screwed up. His fake bravado instantly melts into pure, sweating terror. Even as he glares daggers at the violently trembling bully, Klein's mind flashes to the image of a faceless blonde woman. He realizes this burning fury isn't actually about a mother he never even met. It's about the sheer unhinged audacity of these branch family parasites disrespecting the main bloodline. A violently sinister black aura begins bleeding from his pupil, rapidly shifting into a glowing purple star. In his mind, he scoffed, completely baffled by how the legendary bloodline of the hero who once slaughtered him had sunk to rock bottom. As dark magic throbbed through his veins, he couldn't help but wonder why the heirs of his ancient rival had degenerated into a bunch of whiny, bickering brats. But just as the tension threatened to explode into a full-blown bloodbath, Dunkel shoved his way into the crossfire. He shot the bleeding aristocrat a death glare, barking a harsh command to back off. The loyal knight's face was stone cold as he drew a line in the sand, issuing a crystal-clear warning: one more word against his young lord, and there would be hell to pay. Grinding his teeth so hard they nearly cracked, the disgraced swordsman swallowed his pride, realizing his window for revenge had slammed shut. Stomping away down the corridor, Dalton desperately tried to scrape back a shred of dignity, screaming that Klein was lucky his bodyguard stepped in. Not even flinching at the pathetic tantrum, Klein simply turned his gaze to Dunkel and casually asked for a massive favor: a spare sword. Fast forward to midnight, the duo slipped away to an isolated fog-drenched courtyard, hidden safely out of sight from the mansion's gossiping staff. Fulfilling the bizarre midnight demand, Dunkel politely offered up a basic iron training blade. Standing there shivering in the biting night breeze, the knight finally snapped out his burning question. Why on earth did the young master suddenly crave some swordplay in the dead of night? Ignoring him completely, our guy whipped the blade through the dark, mumbling under his breath as he attempted to mirror the legendary meteor strike he had witnessed Dellen unleash that very afternoon. Nodding at the heavy balance of the metal, he casually waved his bodyguard away, tossing out a weak excuse about needing to practice in total isolation. Staring at Klein's retreating back, Dunkel felt a heavy twist of heartbreak in his chest. Sure, the kid was still clinging to a hopeless swordsman fantasy, but his body was a completely empty husk, without a single drop of mana. Pivoting to leave the courtyard, the loyal guard just sighed heavily, betting his life that a boy with zero magical energy possessed exactly zero chance of awakening the Duke's devastating family technique. Now completely alone in the swirling fog, our protagonist let the heavy iron drop to his side, totally chilling, despite the massive mountain he had to climb. Squeezing his eyes shut, he tapped into his terrifying memory, picturing every tiny muscle twitch of his half-brother's earlier fight. It was all branded into his skull like high-definition video. Without hesitating for a single second, he slashed the air, nailing the stance, hitting the exact rhythm, and flawlessly channeling the precise magical current needed to trigger the ultimate Rhineland. A secret art. Instantly, a wicked burst of shadowy electricity ripped through his veins, his eyelids snapping open to reveal that iconic blinding purple star blazing in his pupil. Just a few yards down the gravel path, Dunkel nearly had a heart attack when an explosive, a hurricane of blinding light and raw gale-force wind blasted out from the training yard. The panicked knight broke out into a cold sweat, squinting into the neon violet flash as he instantly recognized the soul-crushing gravity of that terrifying aura. His jaw hit the floor. His brain desperately tried to compute the literal impossibility exploding right before his very eyes. With a single ground-quaking swing, our guy fired off a catastrophic shockwave of raw power, instantly vaporizing the gigantic stone boulder into dust. The pure kinetic violence left the atmosphere humming with dark electricity, while jagged chunks of granite kept raining down like shrapnel. As the heavy smoke finally cleared out, Dunkel stood there frozen like a statue, completely dumbfounded by the smoking crater where a massive rock used to sit. Cautiously tiptoeing back into the misty arena, the shell-shocked bodyguard stammered out his master's name, desperately trying to wrap his head around the utter destruction. But the funniest part, our chaotic genius was just as mind-blown as his escort. A wild, unhinged smirk crept across his face as he realized his insane gamble actually paid off. Smashing the fast-forward button to the next morning at the mansion, a young maid was staring with bug-eyed confusion. Standing right next to her, Garrison looked equally lost, dripping sweat while trying to comprehend the bizarre scene unfolding. Turns out they were just watching our boy casually dunk his entire head deep inside a violently bubbling wooden bucket. Garrison nervously pointed out that the young lord had been choking down his own breath for well over 60 seconds, while Aaron happily cheered that he was basically a human submarine as a couple of maids physically held him down. Exploding out of the water while violently gasping for oxygen, Klein was instantly met with Garrison's totally sarcastic advice to just buy an aquarium for his upcoming holy cleansing. Absolutely raging, the soaking wet aristocrat snapped at the priest for dragging out this literal waterboarding session, but Garrison just chuckled it away, brushing off the torture by claiming he felt some creepy demonic energy lurking around the bedroom. Rolling his eyes to the ceiling, our guy realized he just survived an assassination by a bucket over a random guess, completely ignoring the sweet maid trying to dry him off. Right before a screaming match could kick off, Dunkel barged through the door, clutching an extremely fancy letter sent straight from that jerk Dalton. Klein was thrown for a complete loop when his knight revealed that his stuck-up cousin actually wanted to beg for forgiveness over their ugly showdown in the courtyard. Drying the soapy water off his face, a quick flashback rips him back to the training arena. Echoes of Dalton's venomous trash talk flood his mind, proving that the absolute scumbag never felt a single ounce of regret. Jolted right back to reality, our guy lets out a low hum, his eyes darting across the thick wax-sealed parchment. Turns out, it's a formal summons for a wild hunting tournament. It's insanely sketchy for Dalton to suddenly play nice right after throwing that massive temper tantrum. Klein's piercing gaze narrows, he already sees right through the BS. This entire spectacle is just a pathetic, thinly veiled setup to ambush him. So, when the courier questions if he'll actually show up, Klein doesn't even blink smoothly, stating he has absolutely zero reasons to back down. Throwing a cocky smirk toward his training blade, he knows that freshly stolen Meteor Strike is the ultimate trump card hidden up his sleeve. While locking in his strategy, his brain instantly replays the arena fight, perfectly visualizing every single microscopic twitch of Delane's blade work. His fiercely glowing eye dissects those phantom slashes, cementing the terrifying fact that he can flawlessly mirror any combat move he lays eyes on just a single time. He pictures himself absolutely vaporizing that solid boulder with his bootleg meteor / low-key baffled at how he ended up with such a ridiculously overpowered cheat skill. Snapping out of his daydream, Dunkel dips into a respectful bow, rushing off to prep their ride for this blatantly rigged deathmatch. Suddenly, Garrison completely interrupts volunteering to ride shotgun, which immediately sets off Klein's raging paranoia regarding the holy man's actual agenda. Garrison just stares blankly at the sudden hostility, coolly refreshing the young lord's memory about their previous chat. In a flash, his goofy demeanor vanishes into pure ice as he confesses that today, the air just reeks of a dark, heavy malice. Cut to a few minutes later, and their wooden carriage is aggressively shaking down a battered dirt trail. The splintering wheels violently slam against the jagged rocks, forcefully pulling a pathetic moan right out of our so-called fearless MC. Inside the cramped cabin, Erin is looking totally sick to her stomach, practically turning green while Garrison just chills right beside her. Actually feeling bad for the fiercely gagging Erin, Klein effortlessly chucks a tiny brown cushion her way to help her endure the brutal ride. Leaning his head heavily against his palm, our boy drops the facts. The Western Forest's savage landscape is famously merciless on rookies. He casually mentions that stretching out might actually kill the dizzy spells. Tightly hugging the soft pillow to his heart, Garrison literally starts tearing up over his boss's unexpected kindness, only for Klein to ruthlessly shatter the moment by barking at him to hand it to the snoozing maid. With that hilarious little mix-up out of the way, Klein just props his chin up, spacing out through the violently trembling glass. Watching flashes of the lush emerald canopy whip past, he is completely blown away by how drastically this world has morphed. Suddenly a flashback smashes into him like a freight train. 200 years ago, this exact same dirt was a frozen hellish wasteland choking on thick snow and the rotting casualties of a savage holy war. To realize that, Glacial Graveyard actually blossomed into this tranquil sanctuary is genuinely mind-bending, jerked right back to the present. The grim illusion melts away just as Dunkel yanks the massive oak door wide open, declaring they have finally arrived. Looming arrogantly above them is the Cornwell family manor, an absolute architectural monster, flexing skyscraper-level spires and a ridiculously flashy front lawn. Klein literally groans at the sheer sight of his snobby relative's crib, while his muscle makes sure the totally drained Erin is still breathing. Scanning the insanely over-the-top water fixtures and flawless marble walkways, Klein realizes this side branch's crib is somehow way more decked out and obnoxious than the main duke's actual palace. Spotting the snobby upper class lurking in the shade, he sneers at the staggering mountain of cash being flushed down the drain, just for a basic woodland hunt, meant for literal children. His sarcastic inner rant is brutally interrupted when a harsh, piercing voice echoes through the massive courtyard, screaming his name. Dalton arrogantly stomps into the spotlight, white-knuckling the thick leather collars of some seriously gigantic, snarling hellhounds, dripping with absolute superiority. The cocky noble loudly flexes that every single brick and chandelier here was bankrolled by cash violently squeezed out of Klein's own bloodline. While one of those demonic mutts bares its fangs and violently foams at the mouth, the villain ruthlessly roasts our boy's 7-year banishment to a crusty monastery, openly questioning if he has a single clue how the actual world functions. Completely unbothered by the toxic energy, our guy just stares at the terribly starved bony dogs and sarcastically demands to know when a savage blood sport devolved into a relaxing little tea party. That ice-cold comeback instantly pulls a twisted evil grin from Dalton, who laughs at the young lord's desperate rush to die. Without dropping a single hint of what's coming, the rich brat's fist simply uncurls, letting those heavy leather restraints slide right off his skin and smack into the dust. Snapping out a rapid fire, we are officially starting. The smug relative jump-starts this totally twisted game as his entire pack of mutant murder dogs wildly launches into the tree line. Turns out Dalton's supposed genius tactic for this event was to literally carpet bomb the absolute center of the mountain with massive slabs of bloody flesh. As those glowing-eyed hellhounds aggressively tear through the brush, Dalton arrogantly spits out some completely unasked-for wilderness trivia, gloating that a fiercely starved mutt's scent tracking is literally 100,000 times deadlier than a regular human's. Ripping his bowstring back with the most punchable smirk on the planet, Dalton locks his sights on the target and keeps his pathetic villain's speech rolling, loudly, bragging about how these blood-drunk monsters will be entirely blinded by the free. Feast over. The camera snaps to a hunting dog, utterly bewildered, right as a stray shaft brutally impales its flank, violently crashing the all-you-can-eat banquet. The defenseless animals unleash agonizing howls, while steel-tipped bolts shred their flesh, transforming the predators into the ultimate prey. The absolute madman erupts into a chilling, hysterical cackle, Gloating over his twisted pastime of slaughtering his loyal companions for fun, the deranged target practice halts the second Aaron approaches Dalton, demanding Klein's whereabouts. Spotting our protagonist's dedicated maid, the sleazebag stretches out a hand, patronizingly stroking her hair. Tilting closer with a skin-crawling grin, he blatantly trashes her value to Klein, hinting he could exploit her in a far more entertaining way. For himself. Right before the situation turns vile, a recognizable grip crushes the aristocrat's wrist like a steel trap. Dalton recoils in absolute terror. Klein intervenes, commanding the weirdo to peel his filthy fingers off her immediately. Our guy never even elevates his pitch. He just coldly vows to shatter the dude's limb into pieces if he doesn't step the hell back. Visually shaking from the suffocating aura, leaking from the young lord, the coward aggressively snatches his arm away. Desperately masking his own panic after nearly pissing his pants, the snob sneers at Klein, spinning away from the standoff. He spends 0 seconds hesitating, viciously kicking his steed in the sides to launch the pale mount forward. Shooting back a totally psychotic smile, the antagonist provokes Klein to pursue him into the thick forest, completely brushing off Garrison's panicked screams against riding solo. Klein vaults onto a dark horse, commanding his protector to guard Aaron. Right before the devoted warrior can argue, the young heir slams a pulsating sheet of parchment against his chest. It's a magical distress beacon, a super rare single-use SOS flare that triggers without burning a single drop of mana. Dropping his tone to a whisper, Klein reveals the sketchy cleric has been shadowing their every move. If that weirdo vanishes, everything goes straight to hell, flashing a mystic seal etched across his knuckles. Our boy orders Dunkel to tear the scroll, the instant that shady stalker flinches, ditching his thoroughly confused escort. The reborn mage spurs his mount, blasting toward the timberline. Right on cue, the millisecond Klein fades from view. The fake-reading holy man drops his text in bone-chilling quiet. The camera cuts to the dense wilderness. The sun vanishes entirely, plunging the branches into a suffocating, ghostly void. Pushing through the midnight path, Klein wagers the cocky noble hasn't gained much distance. Out of nowhere, the copper stench of gore hits his nose, forcing him to yank the reins hard. Dalton lingers inside an open grove, chillingly tasting fresh crimson off his steel edge, completely circled by the slaughtered remains of his personal hounds. Dismounting his ride, Argies glares at the bloody massacre, flat out demanding to know what twisted stunt he is pulling. Even for an ex-demon king, the pure sickness of butchering your own faithful pets, for a laugh, is an utterly revolting spectacle. Perfect timing. The painfully dressed edgelord levels his weapon theatrically, declaring this as the absolute climax of his sick little tournament. Aiming his blade directly at our hero with a totally unhinged death stare, the psycho shrieks that Klein is the ultimate target on today's hit list. He lays out his barbaric scheme, bragging about hacking Klein's neck off and punting his skull directly at Delane's boots. The trash talk flows as the madman drags the Rhineland name, calling them zero, but a weak hollow joke. A crisp snap of his fingers slams the ambush wide open. A heavily armed death squad bleeds out of the pitch-black shadows. Their actual agenda finally steps into the light. Eradicate the core lineage so this side branch can snatch the Duke's throne for good. While the snipers pull their strings tight, the aristocrat spits on the exact heritage our boy inherited. Klein just fires back the coldest, blankest look imaginable, while this clown essentially test runs tomorrow's tabloid headlines. This absolute joker is out here generating top-tier clickbait, yelling about the legendary Northern Sword Clan crashing down and how our guy is seconds away from becoming literal kibble. A brutal shift corrupts the young master's eyes, a silent lethal ember sparking inside the shadows. A lazy grin slithers across his mouth, followed by a harsh, mocking snort. Rather than pleading for mercy, Bro absolutely snaps, exploding into a psychotic, breathless cackle that violently rattles the timber. Utterly paralyzed by the random outburst, the snob demands to know if his victim just suffered a mental break. Flicking away a tear, Klein's joy instantly dies into a freezing hollow quiet. While he verbally butchers the arrogant punk for overstepping his boundaries, the horrifying primordial aura of Archiman leaks right into the physical world. Dalton's fake alpha facade vaporizes on the spot, leaving the guy dripping with nervous sweat, finally grasping he just ran his mouth to an actual walking apocalypse. Our boy delivers the most brutal reality check ever forged, icily reminding the shaking coward that this whole aristocratic empire was constructed entirely on his. The dude is a literal walking corpse, and there is zero chance he will let some entitled brat spit on his ultimate sacrifice. Suddenly, the atmosphere turns incredibly dense as a colossal wave of blue and green aura explodes out of his physique. Dalton's mind totally crashes, stuttering about how a guy with zero magical energy is somehow flexing this kind of power, but our protagonist simply shuts him down with a cold, terrifying rejection. Effortlessly putting the idiot in his place, Klein unveils a horrifying reality. This is not some beginner-level spellcasting. It is pure, unfiltered magi. A crushing, suffocating gravity forces the hired guns face-first into the dirt as they desperately throw up their arms to block the blinding shockwave. Hearing that specific term strikes the side branch aristocrat like a runaway locomotive, his eyeballs nearly popping out of their sockets in absolute dread. Bathed in the sinister luminescence of his own aura, our hero begins whispering a primordial spell to resurrect the fallen. Throwing his arms open, he orders the ancient corrupted souls, swallowed by history, to awaken and bow to their rightful king. Violent vortexes of energy warp into gigantic nightmarish craniums, roaring a single spine-chilling command consume. Absolute soul-crushing doom drains the color from the aristocrat's face, as the nightmare unfolding before his very eyes finally registers in his brain. The coward nearly soils his pants, shrieking the title Archimand, while our guy's freshly summoned undead battalion shrieks for carnage, hungry to shred every last miserable soul on the battlefield, leveling a single finger at his quivering victims. This absolute unit delivers the ultimate command to erase them from existence. Our protagonist honestly believed a 200-year slumber might erase the memories of his grim bone, collecting prime years. The man sincerely attempted to reinvent his image wearing a sharp-tailored suit, but you just cannot wash away the aura of a supreme terror clad in obsidian steel. Even as the decades stacked up, the thrill of that untamed destruction continued whispering to him from the shadows. He recalls reigning at the absolute summit, absorbing the eternal wails of the deceased, pleading for his guidance. And now, stretching his hand through the chasm of history, every last ounce of that primal frequency comes rushing back into his bloodstream, crushing that liquid shadow magic inside his fist. Our guy is essentially wandering through a dark museum of his own past, absorbing the delicious nostalgia of being an unstoppable monster. With perfect timing, the hitmen are literally pouring sweat, eventually connecting the dots regarding the mythic Archimand. A dense, suffocating fog blankets the combat zone, exposing the grim fact that they are no longer facing a single man in formal wear. A symphony of sinister rasps pierces the haze as glowing crimson pupils zero in on their fresh meat. Dalton remains frozen in dead silence, likely grasping that he dragged ordinary thugs into a battle against an actual lord of the undead. However, rather than sprinting for the hills, his oblivious henchmen literally burst into hysterical laughter at the bony legion. Listening to them label his mythical troops as garbage instantly buys the mercenaries a lethal death stare from Klein. Boasting at the top of his lungs, the leader insists he has shattered ordinary skeletons in the past, blatantly overlooking the reality that these specific warriors are forged from pitch-black darkness. Idiots until their dying breath, they legitimately scheme to steal trophies entirely oblivious to the utter slaughter they just volunteered for. Flashing an arrogant grin, Dalton throws a harsh hand signal to carve out a route, permanently condemning his entire team to their doom. Reacting to Dalton's muted directive, the concealed snipers lock and load their heavy crossbows, fixing their sights right on Klein's chest. Shouting a harsh order to shoot the masked thugs, unleash a perfectly timed volley. An enormous wave of iron-pointed projectiles shreds through the hazy atmosphere, blotting out the light overhead. Our hero refuses to blink as the deadly artillery showers down upon his precise location. The brutal collision whips up a colossal storm of dirt, making it look like a guaranteed total wipeout. Overflowing with arrogance, Dalton chuckles, thoroughly convinced that Klein just got transformed into a bloody porcupine. Yet that conceited smile immediately melts away the second the smoke begins to clear. Rather than piercing skin, the bolts are merely hovering uselessly within the ethereal, shadowy figures of the resurrected soldiers. Standing entirely unscathed, our guy is flawlessly protected by a physical barricade of colossal crimson-eyed beasts. He lets out a bored sigh, realizing that 2 centuries is apparently plenty of time for the world to suffer amnesia regarding what his mythic guardians truly resemble. Sweating in sheer panic, the remaining killers are completely freaking out over the fact that these bony foot soldiers abruptly conjured gigantic barricades out of thin air. Unfazed by their terrified screaming, Klein concedes that if these creatures were your basic low-tier fodder, their bewilderment would be 100% valid. Sporting a sinister grin, this absolute icon guarantees them that his personal battalion is forged on another level entirely. Instructing the quivering aristocrat to pay close attention, he smoothly commands his radiant-eyed bone squad to lower their defenses and pivot. Directly into attack mode, our boy is not merely seeking a little payback. He makes it savagely apparent that any fool possessing the nerve to disrespect his historical martyrdom is about to be turned into top-tier monster food. Gripping his hand with deadly intent, Klein unleashes his abyssal army to utterly obliterate the enemy forces. Instantly, the nightmarish ghouls launch themselves ahead at breakneck velocity. Dalton recoils, absolutely stunned by the blinding pace of the approaching doom. His crew stands paralyzed, howling in pure panic as animated corpses dash like professional sprinters. Yet time runs out to comprehend this madness before the bony front line savagely slams right into their barricades. A catastrophic blow instantly shreds the forward formation, leaving a hired gun hacking up crimson. A total bloodbath unfolds as the unstoppable thralls slice apart the terrified warriors with surgical precision. Witnessing his entire unit ripped to shreds before his very eyes, the captain bitterly swears at his utter powerlessness. While the infantry wreaks absolute havoc below, Klein icily barks his next strategic command without blinking. High up in the treetops, a backup squad of skeletal marksmen pinpoints the remaining prey. The metallic clanking of readied crossbows rings across the branches as broadcasting imminent death. Figuring out they are entirely boxed in from the sky, the leftover hitmen scatter wildly in a frantic scramble to flee. Uttering one frosty syllable, our boy locks in their demise. A brutal downpour of arrows cascades from the heavens, piercing the hired killers as they shriek in pure torment. The woods ring out with choking gasps, while the attackers get ruthlessly eradicated by the exact snare they originally laid. Down in the dirt, the horror show drags on as the shadowy front line viciously slaughters the downed troops. Staring at the horrific carnage unraveling, Dalton suddenly grasps that these are not some basic beginner familiars. Frantic to rescue this botched operation, He hollers at his lingering soldiers to drop their garbage-ranged weapons and unsheathe their steel. The war zone descends into absolute madness, and his panicked shouting hardly pierces the blood-curdling wails of his perishing crew. Understanding he must handle this mess personally, the captain white-knuckles his hilt and gears up to attack. He dashes ahead, putting all his might into it, smashing his heavy blade straight into the closest dark warrior. Delivering a flawless adrenaline-fueled slash, he completely lops the reanimated beast's head clear off its neck. A victorious grin instantly paints his expression, fully believing he just uncovered the glaring weakness of our protagonist's legion. Yet his triumph crashes instantly when the decapitated freak casually lifts its gigantic broadsword and swings it brutally downward, staggering backward in absolute shock. The leader gasps for air while Klein's tone slices through the fog, ridiculing the laughable notion that a mere beheading would halt his troops. Our guy simply holds his ground wearing a freezing calculated grin, totally indifferent to their miserable counterattack. Out on the gore-drenched soil, the headless goon freezes in place, with its chopped-off cranium laying in the mud. Without skipping a single frame, a skeletal claw effortlessly drops low and snatches up its very own noggin. Sinister sparking mana erupts between the broken fragments as the corpse literally clicks, its own body back into one piece, demonstrating precisely why Archiman previously dominated the entire realm. Dalton's pupils dilate in sheer horror, his shivering body proving he finally comprehends that these magic-powered fiends are genuinely immortal. Klein observes peacefully, while his ghastly platoon showcases their true power, never hacking recklessly, but maneuvering with flawless military coordination. The last few rogues are quite literally trembling in their boots, totally mind-blown by these invincible horrors. Flanked by his abyssal battalion, our protagonist stares down as the hostile ranks utterly collapse beneath the crushing assault. He confesses that pulling 11 familiars is his maximum cap for this physical vessel, but realistically, that is plenty to finish this execution. Sporting a bone-chilling smirk, bro courteously questions the shivering stragglers if they are prepared for round 2. A spine-tingling shriek rings across the foggy forest as the bloodbath restarts. Right then, the camera pans back to the mansion's gardens. The scar-faced dude is actively dishing out the juicy details about our boy's chaotic temple era, and Erin is completely devouring every single word. She giggles uncontrollably, totally captivated by whatever absurd mischief he allegedly pulled off. Observing her bubbling energy, the wounded veteran cannot resist cracking a gentle grin, noting how she essentially turned into the ultimate fangirl for the young lord. Cramming her cheeks full of treats, Erin fiercely proclaims her allegiance 100% certain that her employer is a literal saint. It presents a wildly comical split-screen setup, Erin belting out her starry-eyed compliments, while a shattered rogue literally begs for his life at our boy's boots. The comedic timing of her narration labeling bro as gentle, while this heavily bruised killer gasps for air in sheer panic, honestly could not be any more perfect. Even as she completely gushes about him being an absolute sweetheart, his pitch-black summon is busy tearing a begging assassin right down the middle. And what is her bulletproof evidence of his pure heart? The dude tossed her a couple of snacks. It is a ridiculously cute moment that violently contradicts the massive crimson fountain currently soaking the surrounding woods. Seriously, just watch her joyfully chewing her treats in total bliss, proudly proclaiming this ruthless killer to be the gentlest soul breathing. Cutting back to the tree line, our so-called gentle protagonist doesn't even flinch as warm scarlet droplets coat his cheek. Meanwhile, the absolute slaughter continues without missing a beat, with his dark forces chopping the leftover hitmen to pieces like they are prepping for a E. 5-star meal. Pushed into a corner, Dalton is fighting tooth and nail for survival, scraping by to parry a bone-crushing blow. Throwing every ounce of his remaining strength into a wild slash, he somehow manages to launch one of the skeletal warrior's skulls clean off its shoulders. But that fleeting spark of hope is brutally crushed when the decapitated monster simply bends down, grabs its own head, and snaps it perfectly back into place using shadowy magic. Blind panic sets in as the cornered fighter finally understands he is never going to outlast a literal army of self-healing zombies. His frantic gaze instantly locks onto the silent spellcaster chilling in the background, recognizing the oldest trick in the gaming handbook. Choosing to bypass the grunts completely, he dashes madly across the blood-soaked dirt, knocking away rusty swords as he goes. Letting out a deafening roar, he hurtles his entire body straight toward Klein, completely brainwashed into thinking he is the main character saving the day. He yells at our boy to stop playing games, pouring his entire soul into burying this necromancer 6 feet under forever. Smashing his radiantly charged blade downward with devastating force, the head assassin is dead certain he just secured the kill. Instead of even bothering to dodge bro, simply plants his feet as his right pupil suddenly erupts into a terrifying violet glare. Violent sparks of dark aura flood his fingertips as he coldly announces that his demonic vision completely maps out the incoming strike. Right as Klein winds up to strike back, his brain instantly projects Dalton's precise fighting posture from a few moments ago, proving he can flawlessly mimic absolutely anything he watches. Dalton's face spasms in pure shock as he spots his own legendary Rhineland, bloodline martial arts taking shape directly in front of his face, exploding in a blinding wave of purple lightning. Our dark protagonist fires off the hijacked meteor shredding straight through the killer's armor like it is made of cheap tissue. Absolutely stunned, the wannabe executioner freezes in place, gaping at his broken weapon, while a lethal geyser of crimson bursts from his own torso. Dripping with his opponent's gore, Our guy icy coldly guarantees the fading warrior that a quick painless death is nowhere near the menu, and that his real nightmare is only just beginning. Glaring down at the broken man, hacking up chunks of red, Klein casually admits that the hitman's desperate strategy actually made perfect sense. A sudden flashback reminds him of the one massive weakness from his previous existence. In the old days, his former self Archimon got completely wiped out, because taking out the master immediately unplugs every single undead soldier. Jolting straight back to reality, Klein funnels that primordial shadow energy directly into his fingertips, 100% accepting his villainous roots. He points out the twisted joke that the sacred blade skills of the noble kid he hijacked are the exact tool needed to patch up his ultimate flaw as a magic user, sporting a cheek totally drenched in fresh scarlet. Our Dark Lord delivers the rawest flex imaginable. He effortlessly mentions how the loser's spilled guts are literally just feeding experience points to his brand new, mortal shell. Listening to his target openly brag about soul-swapping into a fresh vessel, the bleeding assassin glares up in absolute mind-bending confusion. Raw dread heavily drops onto him as his dilated pupils lock on to the demonic entity he mistook for a bratty rich kid. Towering over the ruined fighter, our protagonist completely blanks him just to trash-talk his rival Burkle, pretty much telling the guy to pull up a front-row seat for the incoming slaughter. Deep down, Klein silently swore to drag his ruined legacy out of the dirt, whatever it takes. Blinking out of the darkness, the battered hitman groggily peels his eyelids open, waking up totally lost inside an unknown, terrifying room. Swallowed completely by a thick, choking black pitch, he frantically strains his neck to figure out where the hell he is. The chilling grind of thick steel chains echoes against his wrists, shocking his completely paralyzed arms with a freezing rush of anxiety. Once his pupils finally dilate, the pure nightmare truly registers. He is strapped tightly wrists and ankles to a gigantic iron throne covered in rusted spikes. Violently jerking against the heavy metal cuffs, his lungs freeze completely when a massive plate-clad giant calmly walks out of the abyss. Glaring downward with an icy god complex, the necromancer drops the absolute bombshell that his prisoner has actually already flatlined and just respawned inside a personalized version of hell, completely controlled by Archimon, helplessly chained to the bloodstained metal seat. The shattered hitman violently shakes as he gazes up at the hulking shadow, entirely unable to process his eternal damnation inside the Dark Lord's personal torture realm. The Dark Caster lays out the facts. In the living world, this scumbag aggressively starved and brutalized innocent hunting dogs, warping their endless agony into a completely twisted playground. He perfectly recalls the sick euphoric grin glued to the killer's face right as he pulled back, his bowstring to shed innocent blood literally getting high off his own brutal axe. Jolting straight back into the pitch-black dungeon, the panicked prisoner thrashes wildly against his iron cuffs, aggressively shrieking at the Shadow Mage to shut the hell up and unchain him immediately. Right in the middle of his furious tirade, the screaming chokes in his throat. A bone-deep terror floods the panicked prisoner as he sits helplessly chained in the suffocating darkness. Horrific memories of the lethal blow hijack his brain. He distinctly recalls the sickening crunch of Klein's sword ripping straight the wrist through his ribcage out on the blood-soaked battlefield. He stares down at his flawlessly intact skin, mind spiraling into absolute chaos. That is, until our protagonist delivers the icy, gut-wrenching truth, he already crossed over to the other side. This shadowy dimension serves one single purpose to force him to choke on his own twisted karma. Cold sweat completely drenches his face as the trembling assassin frantically denies reality. He pleads with the necromancer to quit playing sick mind games and cut him loose right now, but our boy doesn't even blink at the miserable groveling. Klein casually lifts a single finger, igniting a ghostly cluster of sapphire fire. He flatly states that swallowing the truth is entirely optional. Striding out of the shadows, the Dark Lord conjures a terrifying pack of colossal ghostly predators. These spectral hellhounds lock onto their prey eyes, burning with a sinister neon blue menace, as Klein officially kicks off the hour of absolute judgment. Every last drop of blood vanishes from the captive's face. He is staring dead into the maws of the exact same beasts he used to brutally torture. Flashing razor-sharp phantom teeth, the ghostly creatures erupt into a deafening, blood-curdling symphony of growls. Their master ruthlessly orders the prisoner to soak in every ounce of their boiling rage. At Klein's quiet command, the glowing-eyed beasts explode off the ground. They vault directly at the defenseless Dalton, hungry to rip their long-overdue revenge straight from his bones. A miserable screech rips from his throat as phantom teeth sink deep, forcing him to brutally swallow the excruciating torment of his own sick crimes. The sickening sounds of tearing flesh violently echo across the jagged cavern walls. Klein shoots him a dead-eyed, remorseless glare, serving up the ultimate spine-tingling sentence. He is making absolutely sure Dalton marinates in the personal hell he personally constructed. Dalton violently thrashes in blinding pain as supernatural jaws relentlessly shred his flesh. Utterly ruined and drowning in despair, he cries out for a sliver of the mercy he consistently denied his own helpless victims. A solitary teardrop hits the pitch-black floor. It marks the pathetic, soul-crushing acceptance of his total annihilation. Mangled, dripping blood, and entirely drained of his trademark cockiness, Dalton slumps into a shattered heap on the freezing stone. Meanwhile, Klein stands perfectly still amidst the bleak, lifeless wasteland. His lethal blade is still firmly gripped in his hand. Keeping a completely unreadable poker face, he just absorbs the suffocating quiet of the bloody aftermath. Out of nowhere, the spine-chilling outlines of his skeletal minions step out of the dense darkness at his back. Crimson eye sockets pierce through the gloom. Nodding at their flawless service, Klein thrusts up a hand, sparking with fierce cyan lightning, announcing it is finally payback time for their unwavering loyalty. True to his promise, he violently shatters the ancient shackles, enslaving the undead. Handing them the liberation they were robbed of for centuries, the bony figures melt away into a breathtaking cascade of radiant stardust. Our boy is left completely solo in the dead quiet. Of course, this peaceful pause triggers his inner philosopher, smacking us right in the face with some heavy, existential dread about why the universe even dragged him back from the grave in the first place. But the peace shatters when a shady cloaked figure drifts out of the rolling mist. The creep casually name drops Klein's title, smoothly pointing out his shocking talent for black magic. Instantly shifting into combat mode, our protagonist barks out a demand for a nade, his brain working in overdrive, desperately calculating exactly how much of his secret arsenal this trespasser just watched. Flashing a deeply sinister grin, the mysterious stalker boldly denies the request. Instead, he simply sparks up a violently crackling sphere of cyan energy right in his palm. Sneering at Klein's incredibly slim odds of surviving the night, the villain unleashes a massive tidal wave of corrupted energy. He brutally yanks the surrounding corpses straight out of their eternal rest, forging a fresh legion of the undead. Malicious blue lightning violently forces its way into the pale faces of the slaughtered, Sellzords dragging their souls, kicking and screaming into a mutated nightmare. With a stomach-turning crack, one of the mangled bodies aggressively snaps its eyes wide open, immediately flaring up with that identical sick, fractured radiance. Capping off his horrific little ritual, the cloaked psychopath forms a protective wall of brain-dead snarling zombies, all twitching and itching to violently rip our boy to shreds. Staring down the growing horde, Klein immediately pinpoints the magic. He realizes this scumbag is wielding a highly restricted Puppet Master revival technique to hijack the corpses, proving without a doubt that this guy is a master-tier necromancer. Our hero grits his teeth while the lunatic brags about recycling Dalton's totally trashed strike team for his own sick agenda. Bouncing off the freezing pitch-black mountain summits, the trespasser's psychotic, unhinged laughter cranks the dread up to an 11. Meanwhile, miles away at the lavish estate, a bubbly maid is aggressively trying to trap Sir Dunkel into a gossip session, loaded with our protagonist's most embarrassing childhood memories. But the hardened Knight Commander is absolutely not having it today. He completely ignores her chatter, his white-knuckled grip crushing a highly suspicious piece of parchment. Glaring down at the ultra-rare emergency distress scroll, Dunkel is totally baffled. Why on earth would his overpowered young lord ever require something so extreme in soul? The very first place the pieces violently click together in his head. He realizes Klein has been completely off the grid inside the dense woods alongside Dalton for more than 3 agonizing hours. Every instinct in the veteran's body is blaring alarms that something has gone horribly off the rails. Done playing the waiting game, Dunkel aggressively vaults onto his warhorse to kickstart a one-man rescue op. But his dramatic exit hits a brick wall when a pair of heavily armed guards suddenly swarm his position, blocking the beast's path. The armored meatheads strictly demand that he glue himself to his designated post until the hunting tournament completely crosses the finish line. Squinting hard, the battle-scarred knight instantly catches the toxic, undeniably shady vibes practically rolling off these 2 random thugs. Catching a glimpse of the Conwell insignia blazoned across their armor, he instantly pieces together that these thugs are Dalton's private hit squad. Smelling foul play from a mile away, Dunkel whips out his official Rhineland Knight's commander badge, planting his feet in a dominant posture that practically double dares them to make a move. Sir Duncankel shoots them a death stare so intense it could literally scorch titanium, mutely breaking the petrified guards until they completely submit, dripping with cold sweat and swallowing their pride. The armored thugs make the smart call that zipping their lips is the only way they are walking out breathing. Spinning around to face the maid, the veteran commander drops his strategy, declaring he is riding out this very second to hunt down his missing lord. Prioritizing her survival, he strictly orders Aaron to grab her things and retreat straight to the estate with that guest clergyman in tow. Aaron nonchalantly points out that the devout guy already dipped out, looking incredibly grim, leaving Dunkel standing there completely stunned. A brutal memory slams into Dunkel's mind like a battering ram, flashing back to Klein's strict heads-up about the priest and his direct order to tear the panic scroll. The memory dissolves violently, yanking him into reality as pure terror grips his chest. Skipping the hesitation, the battle-hardened knight fiercely leaps onto his stallion, roaring out a vicious string of profanities. He viciously chomps down, shredding the enchanted parchment with his very teeth to set off the flare, locking in his darkest dread that this entire scenario was a lethal ambush. Spurring his steed into maximum overdrive, the faithful protector rockets across the landscape, frantically racing to rescue his youthful lord before time runs out. Cut back to the eerie fog-drenched forest, where Klein is currently locked in an intense dead stare with the masked creep and his newly spawned army of rotting corpses. Our protagonist sharply notes that his mana reserves are absolutely bone dry from his previous fight, totally taking his own shadow sorcery out of the equation. Smelling weakness as the enigmatic antagonist effortlessly aims his blade straight ahead, signaling his ghoulish lackeys to swarm the target. Spitting out a brutal command to butcher the young noble, the hostile dark mage observes his creeping legion shrink the distance. Rather than freaking out, our guy simply tightens his grip and flashes a cocky grin, roasting the fool for thinking death magic was his singular weapon. tapping into a wildly contrasting power source. A brilliant crescent moon and star crest erupts onto the back of Klein's fist. Sporting a wicked smirk, Klein raises his illuminated palm, his swagger-filled stance broadcasting to his foe that a catastrophic error just occurred. The cloaked dark arts user stops dead in his tracks, pupils dilating behind his veil the second he grasps that his dominance is completely gone. Without a trace of warning, a gargantuan beam of golden power obliterates the sky, pulverizing the sinister fog. An outrageously jacked gladiator warps into existence and drives his knuckles straight into the dirt, detonating a scorching shockwave that immediately blows the rotting platoon to kingdom come. With irises blazing like actual supernovas, Garrison unleashes a theatrical surge of illumination, heavily revving up his divine superweapon. A relentless flood of unfiltered brilliance washes over the war zone, utterly erasing the corrupted battalion from existence in mere moments. Pivoting away from the wreckage, Garrison smoothly promises the young noble that the lethal threat has been completely neutralized. Utterly mind-blown by this explosive flex of godly sorcery, the rival mage aggressively stutters out a desperate plea for his identity. Striding boldly into the glowing aura, the battle-scarred titan reveals himself as Garrison Veerman, a proxy of the Sacred Order primed to execute ruthless holy justice. Just in case you need a rapid lore dump, proxy is not just some cosmetic religious rank. These three absolute units are fundamentally the Pontiff's private god-tier execution squad. Legends claim these supreme champions are the only mortals equipped to handle the sacred relics, forged by St. Gall, snapping straight back to reality. That mythical energy, rumored to match a heavily fortified stronghold, bursts out of Garrison in an eye-scorching column of golden annihilation. Throwing his arms up against the blistering glow, the masked corpse summoner screams out in pure torment. The raw momentum of the sacred explosion brutally launches the dark sorcerer backward, simultaneously blowing his unholy minions to absolute dust. Gaping in pure horror at the godlike spectacle, the panic-stricken villain helplessly stumbles over his words, demanding to know who he is up against. Observing the chaotic carnage, Klein recognizes that he is chilling right next to the dude who carries the legendary reputation of being the undeniable apex predator in raw physical combat. Cracking a wildly arrogant smirk, Garrison tells our guy to relax loudly, boasting that his overpowered bodyguard has officially arrived. Except this horror show is far from finished, as the mangled limbs of additional undead soldiers violently claw their way through the mud. A brand new swarm of rabid fiends lunges from the shadows, initiating a savage and head-on ambush against our duo. Blazing hollow pupils and snapping teeth crowd the perimeter as the ghouls screech for fresh meat. Without skipping a single frame, the scarred juggernaut viciously jams a blazing sacred relic right down the windpipe of the closest freak. Whipping his fist around in a devastating sweep, Garrison detonates a shockwave of holy aura that casually shreds the zombie mob into confetti, roaring at the condemned souls to pay attention. With his eye burning with unfiltered celestial fire, the proxy fiercely commands the surviving beasts to beg for mercy and pray. Mangled limbs slam into the blood-soaked dirt, raining down the moment the proxy unleashes an absolute hellfire of a holy baptism across the war zone. Even while taking that apocalyptic divine blast head-on, an unstoppable tsunami of rabid corpses sprints straight ahead, their blinding white pupils fixated purely on their next meal. Never one to back down, Garrison clashes right into the undead horde, violently bashing his radiant golden spellbook straight through the skull of the closest ghoul. He coldly calls this savage slaughter a simple act of grace. With fresh crimson splattered all over his hardened features, the battle-scarred giant drops his arm and grimly sentences these cursed souls to their ultimate doom. Watching his massive undead legion get completely vaporized in mere seconds, the masked shadow mage completely locks up in bone-chilling dread, his mind totally failing to grasp why a monstrous proxy of the Order is casually strolling through these woods. Scrambling clumsily backward across the muddy floor, the cloaked villain struggles to even breathe under the heavy, soul-crushing aura pouring out from the Golden Paladin. Every single nerve in the necromancer's body shrieks at him to bolt. He doesn't hesitate. He instantly spins around and flees, furiously cursing out whatever idiot handed him such garbage intel for this trap. Pumping his legs like a total madman, the panicking dark wizard bitterly mutters that going up against this kind of freakish godly power is just straight up rigged. Yet before he can even make it out of the clearing, gravity abruptly betrays him as his boots are violently jerked into the air, knocking his dark mask right off into the weeds. Towering over him like an absolute grim reaper with blazing predatory pupils, Garrison casually dangles the thrashing mage off the ground by his raw scalp, growling out a chilling question of where exactly the coward thought he was escaping to. Sobbing and pleading for just 1 second of mercy, the captured rat instead screeches out a gut-wrenching wail as the mighty Exarch's radiant fingers slowly and ruthlessly start caving in his actual cranium. Choking on his own breath through the mind-numbing agony, the Shadow Wizard gets a deadpan reminder from the giant their little prayer session hasn't even finished, and he ought to be grateful for experiencing this holy retribution. Hot tears flood out of the horrified man's bursting bloodshot eye, the exact moment the skull-crushing grip hits a bone-snapping threshold, ringing out alongside one last booming verdict, chanting out the sacred name of the light. The mountain of a paladin utterly obliterates the dark caster's head, like a watermelon erupting into a sickening explosive shower of thick gore. That roaring chaotic bloodbath instantly drops into a dead eerie silence, leaving our main guy frozen in place. as a tiny squishy sphere casually rolls across the bloodstained weeds right toward his spot, sputtering to a dead stop barely an inch from Klein's dark leather boot. The severed glowing eyeball of the obliterated necromancer peers blankly up from the mud, slicing right through the heavy tension of the massacre. The monstrous exarch slowly pivots that terrifying heavy glare right onto Klein. Gazing up at this absolute beast of a shadow standing knee-deep in ruins, our protagonist hits a terrifying realization that Holy Juggernaut wasn't even breaking a sweat. Just the raw, lingering shockwaves from his most basic swings packed enough punch to trigger an earth-shattering gale. Over 20 ghouls got instantly pulverized into red mist, completely erased just for standing in the guy's blind spot. A colossal silhouette pierces the pitch-black shadows, reaching out a gargantuan, crimson-drenched palm. Thick red drops splatter mere inches from the kid's nose, as Garrison mutters that a sinister, suffocating energy dragged him straight to this very location. But the battle-hardened warrior flashes a subtle, calculating grin, pointing out a massive loophole in the bloody scene. Slapping that heavy, blood-slicked hand right onto Klein's shoulder, the towering proxy lays out his chilling theory. In a deadpan tone, he notes that the leftover mana traces completely clash with the weak trash-tier mage he just slaughtered. Icy droplets race down our boy's face. He instantly knows this monstrous zealot is already sniffing out his secret, especially when those thick fingers clamp down like iron vices. Klein is dead certain one tiny slip-up equals an instant beheading. But right before things go totally south, a recognizable shout echoes from the tree line. Tearing through the dirt at a full sprint, Dunkel screams at the top of his lungs, frantically making sure his master is still breathing, caught off guard by the noise. The young aristocrat glances over to spot his fiercely loyal knight charging in. Out of nowhere, a hot streak of crimson oozes down Klein's cheek. It's the brutal, undeniable backlash of forcing dark sorcery through his incredibly weak body. Seeing this, his sworn protector completely loses his mind. Terrified by his master's beaten-up state, Dunkel completely abandons protocol, lunging across the battlefield in pure, unadulterated dread. He scrambles to catch the young noble before he violently faceplants. The frantic knight starts yelling, begging to know why his boss is bathed in red. But our guy simply brushes it off, telling him to pipe down and hold him up because his legs have completely clocked out. With perfect timing, Dunkel pauses his freakout just long enough to ask about Dalton's whereabouts. That forces Bro to just stand there sweating bullets. Dripping crimson from his lips, he meets the towering giant with heavy, suffocating silence. Fixing his gaze on a violently stained petal, Klein drops the raw, unfiltered truth. He eliminated the hitman solely to save his own skin. Cut to a massive sunlit tribunal hall, where the gruesome aftermath of that midnight massacre is finally getting dragged onto center stage. A violent crash shatters the silence. Someone hammers their fist into the oak desk, explosively launching the intense legal showdown. Count Delkin Cornwell is totally unhinged, roaring, until his throat goes raw over the mere accusation that his golden boy acted as a mercenary. Scrambling to protect his family's reputation, the enraged dad attempts to twist the facts. He bellows that his kid was an upstanding cavalier caught in a vicious setup. But the head magistrate isn't swallowing a single drop of that pathetic performance. He smoothly waves a single document in the air, instantly silencing the noble's hysterical outburst. Standing firm, the Duke bluntly states that Klein's testimony has remained rock solid through every single round of questioning. And he brought the receipts to prove it. Without missing a beat, he slams down the ultimate trump card. He exposes legitimate logs, proving the Count covertly deployed 20 armed thugs the exact second those boys vanished. Freezing perspiration swamps Cornwell's complexion. In his head, he viciously tears into his rented muscle for being total morons and leaving blatant evidence behind. Backed against the wall and dripping with dread, the Count sharply switches gears. He argues it is biologically impossible for a magic-deprived, unarmed brat like Klein to ever butcher a fully trained cavalier. On cue, the entire gallery explodes into a swarm of doubting murmurs. The crowd overwhelmingly agrees that the scrawny kid severely lacks both the mana pool and the raw brawn to execute such an unbelievable feat. Figuring out he is trapped, Count Cornwell makes the cold-blooded choice to completely abandon his deceased heir. He knows his own head will roll if anyone discovers his scheme to assassinate a mainline descendant. A wicked, desperate grin spreads across the aristocrat's lips as he weaponizes a new angle. He projects his voice, blatantly attacking the young master's fundamental sanity in front of everyone. While the fiery hearing escalates, the Count's toxic accusations unearth nasty historical rumors. He ruthlessly weaponizes the deceased Duchess Claire's eccentric legacy alongside Klein's early years. When the kid hallucinated that he was the terrifying demon Lord Archimond, the overseeing Duke snaps completely. Clenching his jaw, he fiercely commands the flailing patriarch to put a leash on his toxic mouth. Refusing to yield an inch, Cornwell shrieks that the mana-crippled boy absolutely had to have bought his own hidden killer to slaughter Dalton. Suddenly, an icy dominant tone slices right through the temper tantrum. All color completely vanishes from the Count's skin as he snaps his neck backward. He immediately identifies the bone-chilling resonance of the exact same kid he wrote off as helpless prey. Gliding out from the dim corners and straight into the sunbeams, Klein struts forward without a care in the world. He boldly ridicules the absolute trash endlessly pouring from his attacker's lips. Without blinking once, our protagonist drops the brutal reality. He explicitly verifies that he buried Dalton solely to stay alive right before Garrison. Manga crashed the party to wipe out the zombie strike force. Sweating buckets, the cornered aristocrat pathetically stutters that the entire story is a blatant lie. which triggers a terrifyingly tranquil comeback from the young master. Leaning aggressively into the pure madness of the situation, Klein unleashes a predatory grin as his iris flares a haunting neon pink. Dripping with sarcasm, he asks if his imaginary demon lord identity is magically a verified fact now. That horrifying surge of pure swagger completely shatters Cornwell. The once raging father is left violently gagging on his own syllables in sheer paralyzing terror. Behind that lethal stare, bro, quietly locks in the savage promise he swore over Dalton's dead body. He is going to reconstruct his shattered bloodline from the ground up using nothing but his own 2 hands. And he isn't about to let any bottom feeders block his path, but his grim fantasies of wiping out the backstabbing Branch family get abruptly shattered. A crisp, demanding knock rattles the massive oak doors. Sunlight glints off blonde hair as an unknown woman's voice cuts through the suffocating room, effortlessly brushing off her late appearance. Guarded by heavily armored soldiers, Laya steps into the spotlight. She instantly owns the room, radiating the pure dominance you'd expect from the captain of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. Peeking over his shoulder, Klein remembers her showing up at the Blade Combat Showcase a while back, which leaves him totally stumped. Why on earth is she crashing this trial? The rest of the council is just as lost, outright demanding to know why the Fallwyvern family drama concerns her. But the chief magistrate instantly silences the whispers, stating he personally cleared her entourage, diffusing the ticking time bomb of a room Heinkel casually drops that the late absolutely awful Dalton used to run. Mercenary job specifically for her squad. Shrugging off her thick crimson coat into a servant's waiting hands, the imposing new commander gets the official green light to spectate this absolute train wreck of a hearing. Those piercing two-toned eyes instantly zero in on their prey. She sweeps her gaze across the hall with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. Locking eyes with our boy from a distance, Leia doesn't waste a single breath. She lifts an elegant hand, effortlessly demanding a one-on-one chat with him. Tossing out a bombshell like that leaves Klein completely reeling. His mind practically fries itself trying to figure out why an elite warrior wants him isolated. Before our guy can even spit out an excuse, Heinkel waves it off, stamping his approval on the impromptu meeting. Shoving the sweating young heir forward, the old man tells him to make it snappy, totally stripping Klein of any chance to respectfully back out. He chokes back a heavy sigh, mentally cursing how aggressively demanding these sacred knights always are. But halfway to the door, a light bulb flicks on. He suddenly clicks that this random detour might actually be the ultimate opportunity to dig up her real agenda. He mentally shrinks it down to 3 likely scenarios. She's either verifying a wild rumor, throwing out an accusation, or pushing his boundaries. Slapping on a mask of confidence, our hero formally bows to the Duke's command, shadowing Leia right out of the tribunal. This absolute mad lad resolves not to flinch no matter what kind of ambush she's prepping. As the massive doors thud shut, they are totally boxed into a secluded parlor. Klein silently swears to weaponize his family's reputation if things turn ugly. Leia Ren Fallwyvern, the firstborn of an elite ducal house, an unrivaled spearmaster, and the supreme commander of the Blue Sacred Spear Knights. She is essentially a living, breathing cheat code. Her track record is so ridiculously epic, it practically demands an instant flashback. The history books drag us straight into a nightmare. A massive swarm of rabid orcs stampeded across the dirt out for blood. These hulking, axe-swinging freaks roared at the sky, lunging at her, as if they actually stood a ghost of a chance against this titan. A blinding azure flash exploded from her iris, sparking the ignition of a catastrophic hidden skill. With one merciless sweep, a blazing crescent of energy shredded straight through the vanguard beast. She twirled her crystalline polearm like it weighed nothing, solo wiping the entire mob of elite-tier threats during that legendary Western Forest campaign. As the memory dissolves, she throws a deadly look over her shoulder. Behind her lies a war zone completely scrubbed clean by her own raw power. Ripping us back to reality, the Knight Captain barks at our boy to pick up the pace and trail her down the dimly glowing corridor. While Klein practically jogs to close the gap, Leia completely obliterates any sense of family bonding. She flat out tells him they aren't even true blood relatives. Pacing nervously behind her, his brain jumps back to a dusty chat he had with Heinkel, digging up the twisted family tree that technically labels them step-cousins. The brutal reality clicks into place. Because she was born to the first wife, DNA-wise, they are literally just 2 total strangers. Out of nowhere, the powerhouse warrior halts. Her features darken as she confesses there's a burning personal itch she needs to scratch. Completely ignoring the existence of personal space, Leia violently grabs our guy by the collar, almost sending him into cardiac arrest. Pinning him down, she leans in way too close and casually drops an absolutely insane request to feel him up. Bro's entire mental hard drive crashes at the pure madness of the situation. He's left stuttering in a full-blown meltdown over this 0 to 100 escalation, refusing to entertain a rejection. Leia aggressively snags his wrist right out of thin air. Tracing her thumbs across his palm, she brutally notes that his skin is ridiculously pristine and softer than a newborn's. Our dude is sweating buckets internally, screaming about why she's thoroughly inspecting him, while she coolly breaks down how even elite blade masters build up thick calluses in very specific zones. She buries her thumbs brutally into his knuckles, fiercely whispering that muscle memory never lies about gripping a sword. Invading his personal space until their breaths mingle, she violently drops the polite facade and accuses him straight to his face. He has never actually swung a blade in his life. The fierce commander pieces the puzzle together right then and there. She aggressively demands to know how a scrawny teenager with absolutely zero battle calluses managed to butcher an official, imperial knight, and 20 heavily armed mercenaries. While her piercing gaze practically dissects him on the spot, a chilling thought crosses her mind. What if this kid survived the gruesome massacre by wielding some sinister forbidden sorcery? Sensing she's dangerously close to sniffing out his secret, our guy forcefully shoves her back, desperately breaking the suffocating tension. Instantly shifting into a defensive stance, his mind blares red alerts, tagging this woman as a lethal threat. Masking his panic, he sarcastically scoffs, asking if she honestly believes he is the mythical Archimand. But those razor-sharp golden eyes just lock right back onto his soul. A cold sweat breaks out on our hero's neck as he realizes this is no simple interrogation. She is ruthlessly analyzing every single microscopic flinch he makes. His mind races at 1,000,000 miles an hour, instantly realizing that keeping his mouth shut will only fuel her deadly suspicions. Choosing chaos over caution, he flashes an impossibly cocky smirk, leaning headfirst into the ultimate bluff. He puffs out his chest, grandly declaring himself the ultimate Dark Lord, but she completely shatters his cinematic climax by doubling over in hysterical laughter. Literally wiping away tears of amusement, she waves off his massive flex as absolute garbage, ruthlessly degrading him to nothing more than a pathetic little brat. That unimaginable level of disrespect leaves Klein absolutely paralyzed. His towering ego shatters into 1,000,000 pieces from the effortless roast. Brain utterly short-circuiting from the brutal rejection, he just stands there glued to the floor. His jaw practically unhinges in pure disbelief, shaking with overwhelming frustration. He desperately chokes out a plea asking if she meant to use a different word, but the icy Knight Commander casually offers to say it again. And oh boy, she doesn't stop there. Leia methodically destroys his entire sense of manhood, brutally mocking his scrawny frame, his pathetic proportions, and his total lack of any terrifying aura. Every single insult strikes like a fatal combo, leaving our boy utterly ruined emotionally. She coldly highlights how practically impossible it is for a frail weakling like him to execute a genuine elite warrior. Then tossing a glance over her shoulder, she drops a jaw-droppingly spicy bet. She boldly claims she would eagerly surrender her own lips if he genuinely possessed that kind of raw, monstrous power. This insane tonal whiplash catches him completely off guard, instantly washing away his bruised ego and replacing it with pure, unfiltered confusion. Mind practically blowing a fuse from the sudden spicy tension, he frantically tries to calculate the hidden trap behind such a wild proposition. But before he can even untangle this bizarre web, Leia completely shuts off the charm, snapping back to business and demanding he follow her back inside. Pausing momentarily by the balcony, as the blood-red sunset paints the sky, she drops one final heavy observation. A fleeting shadow of sorrow softens her fierce features as she mutters that the true Archimand would never behave so pathetically. Smash cut right back to the grand hearing room. The massive oak doors violently slam open as Klein and Leia make their dramatic re-entry to a high-stakes trial. Staking his ground before the brutal aristocratic assembly, the young master faces the sickening reality of his current death sentence. As a totally disgraced outcast, his truth holds zero weight in this corrupted room. Across the marble floor, Delkin Conwell is practically sweating bullets, while our boy quickly figures out that politely claiming self-defense is not going to save his neck today. Looming menacingly from his elevated podium, the imposing Duke of Rhineland barks a fierce demand, wanting to know exactly what just went down during their private recess. But instead of giving a boring verbal response, Klein totally snaps. Out of nowhere, he yanks out a colossal broadsword right in the dead center of the sacred courtroom. With an earth-shattering crack, Klein slams the massive greatsword violently into the stone floor, sending a literal shockwave blasting through the entire grand hall. This explosive showcase of raw dominance leaves the entire room paralyzed in fear. Even the hawk-eyed Leia and the almighty Duke are left gaping in sheer disbelief. Aiming the lethal slab of steel dead at a terrified, profusely sweating Delkin Conwell, the young master roars his intention to end this dispute with pure bloodshed. Completely done playing politics, Klein demands they settle the score using the ancient, savagely violent traditions of the frozen North. Suffocating tension instantly chokes the room as he officially declares a brutal trial by combat. The sheer terror of those words practically makes the cowardly Count wet himself. He stammers incoherently, completely melting down at the insanely violent proposal. While the gallery erupts into absolute chaos, the merciless rules of the blood duel echo clearly in Klein's mind. It is a completely lawless slaughter, where absolutely anything goes and the last man, breathing, gets to write the unquestionable truth. Trembling helplessly under the sword's lethal edge, Delkin frantically whines about this insane escalation, only for our guy to ice-coldly list off the endless string of unforgivable grudges piling up between them. Glaring holes through his terrified target, Klein replays the disgusting nobleman's endless barrage of trash talk. How the bastard shamelessly framed him for murder and dared to spit on his dead mother's grave with vile rumors. As the entire courtroom holds its collective breath, the haunting image of his second life's mother briefly flickers in his mind's eye, even though he honestly couldn't care less about her emotionally. Ripping his attention back to the brutal present, our protagonist fiercely grips his blade, forcing the trembling noble to make a life-or-death choice, right on the spot. Hushed murmurs explode through the stands, the crowd practically salivating over this ancient blood-soaked ritual. The crushing weight of the moment pins the desperate accuser to the wall. Looming above from his elevated judge's seat, the 7th Duke of Rhineland formally triggers the ancient decree. swearing an ironclad oath that the arena's sole survivor will dictate the final judgment, soaking in the merciless mandate. Delkin's treacherous brain churns, suddenly grasping that every shred of undeniable proof tying him to the crime has just vanished into thin air. A venomous grin slithers onto Count Conwell's lips as he pivots toward his young rival, taunting the magicless kid about lasting even a minute in the slaughterhouse. The wicked aristocrat shoots a piercing glare, mentally weaving a spineless scheme to hire a mercenary to butcher Klein. Yet our protagonist stands like a statue, icily vowing to carve up any challenger who steps onto the dirt exactly as he slaughtered the Count's heir. With the gruesome showdown locked in for 4 days later, both rivals share a lethal stare-down, fiercely confident in their impending triumphs. Taking it all in, Klein secretly plots to weaponize this deathmatch to obliterate the defiant. Splinter factions permanently. Hours later, the shadows deepen as the camera pans to the massive Rhineland Manor, where the suffocating gravity of our lead's towering ambitions chokes the room. But not everybody is buying into this suicidal blueprint, and an enraged scream shatters the silence of the lavish corridors. Looming over him in absolute shock, his older brother Delane completely snaps, roaring about the absolute madness of willingly marching into a fatal bloodbath. Chilling on the sofa like it is just a breezy Sunday afternoon, Klein absent-mindedly rubs the back of his neck and swats away the hysteria, casually dropping the bomb that their terrifying dad has already rubber-stamped the execution order. That bombshell hits Delane like a runaway freight train, instantly vaporizing his blistering rage as he desperately tries to comprehend the family head's cold blessing. Frantic to shield his little brother, the golden-haired heir lunges forward, pleading to fight in his stead only to get immediately rejected. Klein shoves a bitter dose of reality down his throat, pointing out that the Rhineland's iron-fisted rule over the North hangs entirely on their monstrously strong father, and Delane's status as the flawless prodigy. The Crown Prince simply cannot gamble his life in the dirt. He delivers the savage facts with zero hesitation. Walking into that Colosseum would essentially gift their backstabbing kin a flawless government-sanctioned pass to murder the future lord. In his core, Klein understands the sheer torture Delane feels being benched, but this deadly toss of the dice is his sole ticket to torch his own miserable legacy. Folding his arms with unshakable resolve, Klein strictly denies the substitution. This iron wall drives his frantic brother to violently rip open old wounds from the past. Roll the obligatory heartwarming flashback. We see a bite-sized Delane dashing frantically toward the nursery, vibrating with pure adrenaline to finally meet his newborn sibling. A minuscule glowing hand stretches through the dazzling light, confirming that our boy was oozing pure protagonist aura since birth. Gazing down at the cradle, the young noble was entirely captivated, believing he had just witnessed a heaven-sent angel. Crashing violently back to the current timeline, the elder sibling spills his deepest fears. He is petrified of watching his beloved brother get slaughtered in a meaningless brawl, especially after enduring 7 torturous years of separation. Completely failing to cage his exploding anxiety, Delane dives in and clamps his hands onto Klein's shoulders. A solitary teardrop slides down the future ruler's face as he desperately begs our hero to shed the sea. Tough guy act and awaken to logic. Totally blindsided by the sudden crying session, Klein goes stiff. He is genuinely perplexed as to why his brother is having a total meltdown over a standard brawl. Right before this tear-jerking moment can escalate, the massive mahogany doors burst inward, and Dunkel slashes through the thick atmosphere. Standing at rigid attention, the knight delivers the chilling news. Count Conwell has permanently registered his mercenary for the looming slaughter. Letting his arms fall in absolute defeat, Delane freezes in horror, whereas our protagonist simply cocks his head, faintly intrigued by the identity of his next victim. Dropping the sickening reality, the messenger unveils the combatant's name. It is Randall, a banished royal swordsman infamous for a mountain of corpses. Cue the eerie groaning of splintered tavern doors, perfectly building a ruthless atmosphere to debut this walking nightmare, immediately justifying why he was violently exiled. The visual storytelling literally projects a raging lion onto the screen, brutally hammering home the fact that Klein's newest challenger is an untamed monster. Because every savage villain demands an epic entrance, the camera zooms into a scarred hand, sloshing what looks like thick red wine or pure unadulterated blood into a battered tankard, panning out to expose the sheer devastation. The screen flashes a terrifying, uncontrollable bloodlust warning, while this hulking Goliath casually takes a sip surrounded by slaughtered bodies. Downing the liquid like he has been wandering the desert for weeks, Randall allows the dark red syrup to cascade down his jawline, looking every single inch the demon Klein is destined to clash with. Flashing a wicked grin through the dripping carnage, this total psycho is practically drooling over the thought of making the Rhineland heir squeal. Evidently, this guy missed the memo on our boy's recent slaughter streak. With just 4 days left until his brutal fight to the finish, our protagonist drops by the blacksmith to pick up a highly classified package. Dunkel slides over a tailor-made weapon, but he attaches a grim caution to it. Clutching the handle of the weapon plunged straight into his torso, he faces the brutal truth. A sacred blade has impaled him right through his core. Instead of panicking, Klein merely gives a nod. That exact deadly defect is precisely what he asked for. Clutching his glass cannon of a weapon, our guy strides into the sunlight, completely prepped for the upcoming chaos. Cutting straight to the colossal Colosseum, the packed stadium is utterly mind-blown that the magicless noble kid actually decided to clock in for his own demise. Chilling up in the premium suites, Delcan Conwell is absolutely living for this, cackling out loud at the kid's glaring suicide mission. The arrogant aristocrat leans over to mock the Duke, boasting that his royal powerhouse is about to utterly shred a boy, packing zero magical energy. Catching the disrespect, the Rhineland patriarch stays stone cold, letting the loudmouth dig his own grave, halting over his crushed opponent. The captain declares loudly that this total sweep wasn't a one-man show. Our guy casually holds his ground, waiting for this hyped-up beast to finally crash the party. In a heartbeat, a colossal silhouette blocks out the daylight towering right over his shoulder, dropping down with an earth-shattering boom that launches a thick wall of debris. This towering behemoth rips a weapon straight from the soil, moving like he is dead, late for an absolute beatdown. Rocking a completely psychotic grin, Randall sarcastically questions if this pipsqueak is actually the infamous Lord Klein. Burkle takes it in with a freezing calm, while the Dark Mage damns his entire faction to hell, shooting glares packed with pure venom. The defeated sorcerer screams vicious claims of fake righteousness at the sacred warriors. But before those giant meat hooks can grab hold, Klein fires himself backward to carve out some crucial breathing room. That lightning-fast reflex leaves the bleachers totally speechless, while the cheap seats scramble to figure out how a powerless weakling dashed like a pro. Back in the skybox, Delkin is devouring the drama, screaming over the noise to ask the Duke if his spineless boy can survive an actual brawl. Down in the trenches, Randall flashes a highly conceited grin, figuring his bite-sized target is already wetting his pants. Truthfully, our main man is just planted there, dripping with nervous sweat, silently raging because the giant genuinely gave him a heart attack. Then a dark memory slams into his brain out of nowhere. A horrifying vision of a mangled limb and some twisted cleric clawing at his back. He suddenly gets that his muscles fired purely on survival mode, completely bailing out way before his conscious mind could even process the threat. Simultaneously perched up in the luxury terrace, a shadowed blonde watcher tracks the absolute chaos below, silently trashing some unknown dude as a total scrub whose one and only skill set involves aquatic torture. She props her face up against her palm, locking her sights directly on Klein, the kid who is supposedly deadweight. Her lackey pleads with her to dip out before the dreaded Lady Helion catches wind, but she breezes past his panic, proving she gives exactly zero flips about her stepmother's rage. Actually, she is so hooked on this brewing carnage that she locks in a crazy internal bet. If our dude somehow secures a victory against that hulking warrior, she is 100% ready to bless him with a smooch. Down in the dirt, our guy has no clue he has bagged a new fangirl, voicing loudly that he packed his own hidden agenda for this clash. Attempting to play off his involuntary retreat, he nervously coughs and aggressively complains about a random neck cramp. He attempts to put the Titan on notice about invading his personal space, but Randall instantly slams his bare paw right over his collarbone again, locking eyes with Burkle's unblinking stare. Archerman catches his own twisted, nightmarish face glaring right back. Now that is some brutal psychological warfare. Klein lunges right for the weak spot, casually dropping the ultimate truth bomb that the Empire completely abandoned him, making the hulking brute visibly recoil. But that split-second horror rapidly warps into a twisted grin, as Randall swears to make the kid shriek in agony for crossing that line. Without missing a beat, the exiled warrior drops a mountain-sized punch looking to smash his pint-sized rival flat into the bedrock. Mere frames before the lethal strike lands, a crisp snap rings out as Klein coolly unclasps his tailored coat. The raw kinetic energy from the slam is straight-up explosive, blasting sonic booms and splintered concrete all over the bleachers. A dense smoke screen erupts from a giant sinkhole carved out by the hit, totally blanketing the wreckage. Aiming that sinister new metal straight between the Dark Mage's eyes, the commanding officer tosses him one last shot to spit out his final words. Instead of a pulverized corpse, his gigantic fist is gripping absolutely nothing but a filthy, discarded blazer, way before he can even wrap up his bad guy's speech. The radiant rune sword slices clean through his neck, erupting into a massive fountain of pitch-black energy. Total chaos grips the crowd when they suddenly notice Klein is nowhere to be found inside that smoking crater. A quiet thud breaks the silence way outside the danger zone as his dark boots kiss the dirt. Not a single scratch on him, looking cool as ice. Our guy squares up, gripping that paper-thin blade like a pro. Exhaling a slow, steady breath, he does the math in his head, taking even one clean shot from this steroid-pumped maniac means an instant trip to the afterlife. The behemoth pivots to lock eyes with him, and Klein instantly realizes he has to go all out right here, right now, because just a tiny scrape from that weapon would shred him to pieces. But instead of swinging, Aster flashes a friendly grin and holds out an open hand, inviting his old nemesis to squash the beef and team up for his rebellion. Meanwhile, way up in the luxury boxes, Dellen is absolutely sweating bullets, her face draining of color because she is dead certain our hero is walking straight into his own funeral. Cue a sudden black and white flashback, showing exactly why our guy turned down his brother's challenge, giving their absolute worst enemies a giant legal loophole to assassinate the next in line. Yeah, that is a garbage game plan. So, he is forced to carry the weight of the entire bloodline alone. Snap back to the dirt. Randall rockets forward with blinding velocity, aiming a lethal slash right at him. The massive tank fires back without missing a beat, slamming his gigantic weapon into the earth, but his prey is already gliding backward into the safety zone. Zeroing in, Klein channels a raw burst of violet aura, letting the electricity dance right down the spine of his brittle weapon. The intense glare blinds the Colossus for a split second, catching him entirely flat-footed by the blinding strobe effect. But before Klein can secure the bag, Randall blitzes in, plucking him straight out of the sky with nightmare-inducing agility and burying him into the ground. Eating the shockwave, our boy jams his sword into the soil, like an emergency brake tearing a massive gouge through the concrete, just to buy some vital breathing room. The audience loses their minds as the demonic knight stampedes forward once more, hoisting his radiant battle axe for a guaranteed kill shot. Trapped in the kill box, Klein has zero choice but to tank the monstrous impact right on the chin. The pure kinetic energy of their collision blasts a hurricane of sparks into the sky. Bullying his way forward, the fallen knight cracks a twisted evil grin, screaming for his victim to bust out that forbidden dark magic. Every single fiber in Klein's anatomy is practically crying in agony, while he desperately tries to anchor his feet against this suffocating, insulting onslaught. Suddenly the camera pans to crispy white hair in a custom-fitted dark suit casually strolling. Around the bend, completely unfazed by the gravitational terror filling the room, a quiet, bored sigh slips from the young aristocrat's mouth, unleashing his genuinely monstrous presence. Our protagonist paints a sinister smirk across his face, his pitch-black eyes scanning the stands like he is plotting to massacre every single breathing soul in the building. Swaggering down the corridor, Klein stays frosty. He does not care at all about the blushing maids drooling over his every move. Running strictly on survival instincts, the exiled knight violently flings himself in reverse, desperate to create a massive buffer zone. Up in the bleachers, the absolute casuals start gossiping that the behemoth is just playing with his food. They are totally blind to the pure, unadulterated horror leaking from the battlefield below. Down in the trenches, Randall's brain is short-circuiting, scrambling to process what kind of phantom gravity just almost flatlined. His pulse. A colossal pitch-black angel of death materializes dead behind our protagonist. It is bleeding an aura so venomous and thick, it is literally suffocating the entire Colosseum. Chilling there with an actual metal bucket balanced on his skull, Klein sarcastically questions if this dude ever gets exhausted from spamming these totally useless clown tier ceremonies every single year. Locking eyes with his violently shaking enemy, Klein casually swears he is keeping the filthy undead magic packed away for today. Hitting him with an arrogant grin, this absolute menace announces that, as a pure-blooded Rhineland, he is wrapping up this feud strictly with cold, hard blade skills. Catching that insane flex, Dellen and the Duke nearly choke on their own breath up in the VIP section, stunned by the sheer suicidal arrogance unfolding below. The whole stadium instantly explodes into an ear-shattering roar, eating up every ounce of the hype and crowning our boy like a returning gladiator king. But while the casuals in the back rows are howling for a massacre, Delkin narrows his eyes at the madness with a heavy frown, instantly picking up that this script just went totally off the rails. You've got absolute randoms in the crowd screaming their lungs out that the kid wasn't capping. Yet beneath all that deafening fanboy energy, Randall is just frozen in stunned silence. Bro is absolutely questioning what kind of twisted freak show he just walked into. White-knuckling his battle axe, Randall furiously tries to gaslight his own panic desperately, telling himself that his god-tier physical build makes defeat a literal impossibility. Drilling it into his skull, that his target is a total magicless scrub, the Titan detonates the pure psychotic fury of his royal blade arts, bursting into a sky-high tornado of crimson bloodlust, pumping every single vein and fiber with explosive unchained power. Randall redlines his own anatomy to the absolute brink for one apocalyptic finisher. Blasting himself straight into the clouds, the colossal warrior transforms into a flesh-and-blood scarlet asteroid, locking on to Pancake RG into the dirt from orbit, howling for Rhineland execution. The Empire's ultimate juggernaut pushes all his chips to the center for a single continent-cracking nuke of an attack. Klein completely stands his ground, smoothly gliding through the explosive shockwave like an absolute ghost. Sparking his radiant purple eye, Argine instantly breaks down every single flaw in the Titan's mana reserves and combat style. Completely consumed by blind fury, Randall slams his colossal broadsword into the dirt once more. Since our boy can track the precise trajectory of every single strike, Klein dances through the brutal onslaught without breaking a single sweat. Pure rage takes over, as the massive knight throws a desperate wild haymaker, roaring at his prey for dodging like a pesky gnat, cranking his aura into overdrive. The humiliated warrior howls out, launching a desperate execution strike. The deafening crash completely shatters the stadium ground, blasting a massive tidal wave of crushed stone and crackling crimson lightning everywhere. A suffocating smokescreen engulfs the fighting pit, keeping the entire crowd on the absolute edge of their seats. Once the heavy dust finally settles, Randall is stuck on his knees inside a giant crater, staring blankly at his own empty palms. Cold dread washes over the brute when it clicks that his target flawlessly anticipated and sidestepped the textbook Imperial combo in the blink of an eye. Out of nowhere, a dark silhouette eclipses the bewildered Titan, forcing him to snap his head up in pure terror. Suspended in midair, Klein shoots him a sinister grin, coldly mocking how a frame that huge leaves his blind spot wide open. In a blinding eruption of violet power, the underdog drops the legendary meteor sword technique, carving a brutal blood-soaked trench straight down Randall's back. Up in the bleachers, the massive crowd freezes in absolute silence. Their jaws hit the floor as they witness the mythical sword art, watching fresh crimson paint the entire battlefield. Thrashing around in blinding pain, the The fallen knight shrieks in pure denial, totally failing to wrap his head around how this alleged trash just achieved a literal miracle, flashing an arrogant grin through the settling rubble. Our boy shatters reality itself, pulling off a top-tier aura / even though the whole world knows he possesses exactly zero magical energy. The pure insanity of this plot twist leaves the VIP box completely dumbfounded, pushing one shell-shocked guard to frantically ask his boss if she just witnessed that exact same miracle, but the stunned woman doesn't catch a single word of it. She is totally spellbound, a heavy crimson blush taking over her face as she gazes down at our underdog Klein in pure, unfiltered fascination. Suddenly a deep voice cuts through the dead quiet, throwing the scene back to a moment before the duel even kicked off. Inside the Duke's private study, the tension is thick as Heinkel Rhineland confesses his hands are completely bound by the crushing weight of their house's crumbling reputation. His right-hand man just could not stomach the call, frantically asking why a father would throw his defenseless kid to a literal imperial beast. Dropping a massive bombshell, the Duke reveals that our guy volunteered just to protect his late mother's legacy, and after completely failing to stop him from joining a monastery back in the day, the old man felt he had absolutely zero right to block his path now. Gripping his hands in silent torture, the shattered father admitted his massive failure to shield the people he cherished the most. Yet even while Heinkel drowned in his own guilt, his loyal vassal held his ground, delivering a rock-solid wave of comfort. With unwavering confidence, the raven-haired retainer locked eyes with his master, ready to drop a fact that would soon rattle the entire kingdom. As that flashback slowly fades, the brutal reality of the blood-stained arena backs up every single word. Our boy never sets foot in a deathmatch. He isn't already rigged to win. Snapping back to the present, the Duke's eyes bulge in absolute shock, totally failing to grasp the blind loyalty placed in his so-called useless kid. This mind-blowing victory actually traces straight back to the ancient roots of the Rhineland clan, a savage northern combat style forged in the freezing cold, built to survive by cutting mana drain down to absolute zero. While the capital's royal guards battle like starving monsters leaning on pure savage muscle to obliterate their enemies. Meanwhile, totally exhausted from the massive fight, Klein crashes onto a velvet couch with an annoyed groan. However, the true essence of the North demands flawless self-control, much like a hawk swooping down for a fatal strike. They patiently hunt for the ultimate weak spot, attacking with deadly accuracy, using just a tiny drop of energy. Back in the pit, Klein stands tall as the undisputed champ, his posture, proving that his bloodline's secret art is literally tailor-made for a magicless underdog. Hoisting his sword with a cocky grin, Klein shows the world that this crazy efficiency lets him pull off his ancestors' mythical swordplay, even with a completely empty mana pool. He smugly points out that even without dropping massive nukes of power, it is more than enough to totally shred a meathead like his towering rival. That blatant trash talk instantly strikes a nerve with the giant, making him grind his teeth in pure explosive fury. Howling like a wounded predator, Randall completely loses it, blasting out a gigantic shockwave of blood-red aura that threatens to devour the whole Colosseum. Cutting away for a split second, a male butler strokes his chin, trying to map out a simple way to break down the Holy Church's messy ranking system. Taking the shape of a nightmare-inducing radioactive monster, this overwhelming mana explosion is custom-built to freeze its victim right in their tracks. Even with that soul-crushing pressure crashing down, our boy stands his ground totally chilling, while this massive brute screams his lungs out. Sweating to prove he is the top dog, Randall blasts himself right into the sky, bringing that massive chunk of steel down for a one-shot kill. It is such a bone-chilling flex that Dylan, watching from the stands, just shrieks in total terror, thinking Klein is dead meat. Boom! With an ear-shattering crunch, that blood-red buster sword smashes right into the young Lord's flimsy guard. Sparks blast everywhere like fireworks as the two blades screech together in a life-or-death power struggle. Right then, a flashback hits Klein like a lightning bolt. Previously, Dunkel tossed him the exact custom gear he asked for, laying down a hard warning the second this tailor-made steel locked horns with a mana charge strike it was going to shatter into pieces. Randall flashes this wicked cocky smirk. Totally convinced he just stripped his prey of his only shield, he drives that glowing crimson sword down for the final execution. The behemoth literally roars his victory lap mid-swing, while the top chunk of our guy's weapon goes flying into orbit. But instead of freaking out, our boy's eye flares deep purple. He flashes a devilish grin, casually dropping the bomb that this freshly snapped sword is the exact trick weapon he needed to put this monster in the dirt. A nasty splash of dark red splatters the arena before a single soul can even process the action. Blinking right into the danger zone, our hero shoves that jagged broken hilt skyward in a savage uppercut, slicing Randall's sword arm clean off at the wrist. A majestic sequence of ancient portraits flickers across the screen, winding the clock all the way back to day one. Strolling right into that blood-soaked arena, the Duke's referee instantly kills the match, his booming voice slicing right through the heavy suspense. Up in the bleachers, the crowd is dead silent, literally choking down their dread after that brutally fast knockout. Chilling in the VIP box, Dunkel puts it together. Klein just pulled off a flawless run of the Rhineland clan's ultra-minimal monoblade technique. That is a god-tier move usually kept for hardcore war vets. As the whole master plan clicks in his head, he is mind-blown that the young lord actually spoon-fed the knight, that bait letting him snap the blade just to lock in a point-blank kill shot. Cut to the next morning out in the academy courtyard, where a fresh crop of rookies is surviving a brutal fitness test. Reality finally smacks Randall in the face. He crashes to his knees howling in pure torment while the red stuff aggressively geysers out. From his fresh stump, total chaos breaks out on the dirt floor, while a medic squad bolts toward the thrashing. Knights screaming their lungs out for someone to tie off that heavy bleeder. They tackle the giant to the ground, firing off neon green sleep spells to keep him breathing. Meanwhile, Klein is just standing there, staring down at him with an icy, lifeless gaze. Rubbing his chin like he is mildly bored, this absolute menace casually asks the panicking docs if they can just super glue the hand back into place. Sweating bullets, the medics stutter out that entry-level healing spells cannot reattach limbs, so he is going to need a fake arm, which barely even gets a blink out of our winner. Honestly, Klein is secretly bummed out by how garbage the medical tech is, compared to 200 years ago. Right as the Duke rolls up from behind him, his inner monologue gets rudely interrupted when a hulking shadow blocks the doorway, casually dropping that the young lord is a pretty loud sleep talker. Walking into the light, Garrison flashes a super creepy grin, straight up asking if Klein was having flashbacks to his glory days as the Dark Mage. Pivoting away and awkwardly scratching his head, our boy drops the most hilariously fake gasp ever, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a traumatized kid. With her eyes practically sparkling with hype, the maid proudly brags that she caught every single word of his late-night mumbling. Refusing to fold, the Duke commands the raging noble to stick to their deal, but Conwell just barks right back in his face. With the veins literally popping out of his skull, the Count throws an epic meltdown over losing his kid and his top-tier gladiator in one single bad beat. But before he can even finish crying about it, a pitch-black blur whips right through his throat, launching a splash of crimson straight into the sky. With that signature purple glow lighting up his eye, our guy calls out Delkin Conwell by name, completely tossing the innocent kid persona in the trash. Even when the camera pans out to the massive mansion, Klein's internal voice is just hurling nasty curses at that brainwashed priest. Blinking like a deer in headlights, Conwell just stares off into space, slowly connecting the dots that his head has not actually rolled off his neck yet. Gripping his throat in absolute panic, he listens as our boy cashes in his winner's rights and drops his very first order, getting all up in the shaking guy's personal space. Our guy drops an ice-cold threat telling him to spill all his sins to the Lord of the North and beg for mercy. Totally annoyed, the veteran butler roasts the maid for acting out of line, while Klein just plays the nice guy and rips the candy wrapper open for her, suddenly bursting into a nightmare of purple fire. The hallucination spirals out of control, plunging the shattered aristocrat into a suffocating waking nightmare. Gazing skyward in sheer paralyzing panic, Conwell cowers beneath a towering, scythe-swinging skeletal Grim Reaper, absolutely primed to rip his soul straight from his body. This mind-bending horror completely breaks his mental state, reducing the man to a pathetic, sobbing puddle of chattering teeth. For bigger swallowing, the brutal reality gap between a pathetic rank 5 and an elite rank 4 stings like absolute poison. While the sniveling Count balls out his traitorous secrets, we learn our protagonist is effortlessly wielding an actual dark magic spell called Dead Man's Voice. He turns it into the most downright horrific interrogation tactic on the planet. According to the fresh lore drop, this unique ability is strictly for necromancers, designed to inject raw, unadulterated dread directly into living victims. That perfectly explains why the disgraced Count is currently using his forehead to violently bash the arena dirt while shrieking frantic apologies. Pushed over the edge by the eerie whispers echoing right against his eardrums, the ruined nobleman starts vomiting up every single dirty deed he has ever committed. He even admits to viciously bad-mouthing our hero's mother, Grand Duchess Claire, all while sobbing for a scrap of mercy. Peeking over at the northern relatives tearing into huge chunks of meat like wild animals, Klein genuinely questions if those gluttons only showed up for the complimentary buffet. Thoroughly pleased with this pathetic show, our guy hoists his broken sword hilt high into the air, gearing up to drop his next massive bombshell. Booming his voice across the dead-quiet Coliseum, he orders the entire crowd to pay attention. He is about to set the family record perfectly straight. Radiating pure swagger, he officially stakes his claim as the undisputed champion of this brutal trial by combat, leading with his mother's legendary status. Our boy loudly declares himself the flesh and blood of Grand Duchess Claire Ladelasis. Refusing to pump the brakes, this absolute madman flaunts his father's godly credentials next. He ensures every single hater in the stands knows he is the second-born of the North's most broken knight, Heinkel Rhineland. Soaking in the golden rays flooding the battleground, he finally roars his full name out for the whole damn world to witness. Cut to miles away inside a gloomy, shadow-drenched sanctuary. A massive wooden door groans open, framing a dark silhouette creeping inside. Down on the elaborate marble tiles, a savage display of blade mastery is already popping off. A purple-haired attacker ruthlessly rains down vicious blows against an incredibly chill blonde-haired defender. The guy is completely overacting the theatrical "Oh God of Light" routine. He even gets a flawlessly timed divine spotlight shining directly onto the stone monument. Nearby, a blonde aristocrat lazily munches on some bread, flashing a condescending smirk to acknowledge the newcomer's grand entrance. Garrison marches into the room, rocking a striped uniform and a deadly serious glare, calling out to the elderly man. Maroc nonchalantly replies without even flinching out of his highly exaggerated prayer stance. The priest immediately catches that dark, heavy tone in his voice, prompting Garrison to drop an absolute nuke of an update. Their surveillance target just got ambushed by a dark mage and an entire mob of walking corpses. Pure shock sucks the life right out of Bigger's face as the awful truth clicks into place. Aster then darkly verifies the exact identities of the horrific beasts looming right in front of them. While the old geezer continues talking, a terrifying mental image of a shadow-wielding sorcerer burns into his brain. It exposes how they actually partnered up with the Empire to unleash a massive wave of old-school panic. That warped fantasy keeps running in his head as Marok breaks down his master plan: terrify the living daylights out of the commoners, forcing them to crawl helplessly straight back into the arms of the church, sparking up his glowing star-shaped pupils. Klein gets ready to break down some elite blade work for the very first time since hijacking this reincarnated vessel. But right before he can wrap up his cheesy villain speech, Garrison's arm snaps forward like a whip, violently choking the old geezer out by the throat. Before that arrogant loudmouth can even bat an eyelash, Delin blitzes the gap in a blinding streak of golden energy. He leaves his enemy completely paralyzed in pure shock. Drenched in sweat and violently squirming like a fish out of water, the supposedly invincible Cardinal is totally powerless to break that monstrous grip. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Garrison literally squeezes the traitor's skull until it pops like a water balloon. The gruesome kill leaves absolutely nothing but a sickening puddle of pitch-black sludge. The second that headless corpse smacks the tiles, a pristine pair of white boots saunters straight into the gory crime scene. The newcomer mockingly asks if that brutal little execution finally helped him blow off some steam. Klein closely watches the exact currents of magical energy pulsing through Dellin's veins, instantly identifying the Rhineland family's highly classified combat art. The text box officially debuts this snarky newcomer as Archbishop Palamon L. He effortlessly doubles down on his insult, heavily implying Garrison is packing some incredibly dark secrets deep down in that oversized gut of his. Totally fed up with the holy sarcasm, Garrison throws a highly suspicious glare over his shoulder. He bluntly demands to know if Palamon was the actual mastermind pulling the strings behind this bloodbath. Stepping over the dead cardinal's mangled hand, like it is just some tiny inconvenience on the floor, Palamon drops the ultimate corporate loophole. He did not personally engineer the slaughter, he simply stamped the approval forms. Plus, he brought some brand new intel to the table. Up in the bleachers, the extended relatives are totally losing their damn minds. They are sweating buckets as they watch Delin flawlessly pull off such an insanely high-level technique right out in the open. Effortlessly sidestepping the incoming attack, the Archbishop literally evaporates from Garrison's field of vision. Before the guy can even process what just happened, Palamon casually respawns right behind his back to deliver some chilling new lore. Turns out raising the dead comes with a digital footprint. Hoisting an ornate cross-shaped flask sloshing with crimson fluid, Palamon drops a bombshell. This vial holds the precise magical residue of the dark mage Garrison just eliminated. He breaks it down, revealing the glass trap's two completely different brands of wicked energy. You've got the Empire's generic run-of-the-mill zombie magic, mixed with an ancient, terrifyingly rare spell that twists souls right out of their bodies. Garrison's gaze sharpens his brain, working overtime to wrap around the existence of this primordial, unadulterated dark magic. Crunching the numbers, Palamon lays out the grim reality. Two distinct magical fingerprints guarantee that two separate necromancers crashed that exact gathering. Enter Heinkel Rhineland and the imposing seventh patriarch of the noble household, beaming like the ultimate proud father as he watches his oldest boy conquer their clan's hidden technique. Maintaining absolute composure, Palamon pivots to Garrison's ongoing surveillance mission, keeping tabs on the Rhineland family's second-born son. Heinkel stares down with that heavy cinematic respect you'd expect from a mob boss movie, praising his successor for grinding through agonizing training sessions to hit this peak. Watching from the shadows, our guy connects the dots in a bloodline, actively circling the drain. This blonde genius serves as the patriarch's final shred of authentic glory. While the Holy Church completely loses its collective mind trying to unmask our protagonist's hidden persona, the camera violently smashes to a bleak, rain-soaked evening at a desolate mountain quarry. Far within the jagged caverns, the violent thwack of a pickaxe shatters the suffocating, humid silence. A solitary, grizzled excavator buries his tool into the rock with flawless tempo, hyperfixated on harvesting the radiant gemstones lodged deep inside the granite. Stopping briefly to drag a filthy sleeve across his sweating forehead, he remains completely blind to the gigantic pitch-black talon lunging out from the abyss directly at his spine. A gut-wrenching crunch freezes the laborer in his tracks, and he snaps his neck backward, his pupils dilating in pure, paralyzing horror. His soul-shredding shriek violently rips through the thunderstorm bouncing off the tunnel walls before being completely drowned out by the raging hurricane. Smash cut back to the secure walls of the Rhineland mansion, where the maid Erin is currently suffering a microscopic panic attack over a sewing disaster. She locks eyes with the tiny, insanely creepy-looking plushie she just manifested into existence, freaking out because it possesses an uncanny, terrifying resemblance to her young lord. 7 full days have vanished since that insanely brutal duel to the death. And while the servant erupts into a fit of laughter over her weird masterpiece, our protagonist chills silently at his workstation, completely tuning out the noise. Reflecting on the past, he easily bagged a perfect win over The elite warrior Randall mentally shattered Count Conwell using his hallucination spells and forcefully declared his arrival to the entire aristocratic inner circle. Yet even after hoarding those monumental dubs, our boy is currently taking massive losses against his own 15-year-old physical vessel. His energy tank is resting on absolute zero as he exhaustedly commands his attendant to hit the hay. The girl instantly puffs out her cheeks, whining that he perpetually hogs all the fun without her, while he effortlessly gestures toward the massive tome in his hands, proving he's obviously occupied. Refusing to back down, she mocks him, claiming that flipping through some basic fiction is essentially just killing time, which earns her an agonizingly flat, soul-piercing glare from the young aristocrat. Without uttering a single syllable, he turns the parchment, silently acknowledging that while the binding screams generic fantasy novel, the actual contents are lethally radioactive. Spoiler alert, our guy definitely isn't binge reading the newest romance drop. He's covertly hijacked the pages to stash intense high-level biological blueprints, complex mana networks, and unfiltered pure black magic, all while sipping his Earl Grey tea like a total high society boss. Bro is genuinely out here running the tactical algorithms for his undead legion, accepting the harsh truth that 11 skeletal foot soldiers absolutely cannot survive a massive drawn-out bloodbath. Even anchored in this perfectly tranquil library, the haunting flashback of that battle-scarred clergyman aggressively tugs at his mind, slamming him with the brutal reality that he needs to reclaim his former god-tier stats long before the Holy Order starts hunting him down. The camera cuts to a dim study where the Duke aggressively pushes a rough sketch across the mahogany timber, detailing horrifying encounters down at the regional quarry. The moment the nobleman identifies these monsters as the waking dead, our protagonist's pupils ignite with an absolutely electrifying epiphany. Without hesitating for a microsecond, Klein demands to take the quest desperately, itching to transform an active war zone into his personal dark magic laboratory. The patriarch drops his posture, radiating authentic anxiety as he lists off the body count, highly doubting a literal teenager can survive this nightmare. Swatting away the old man's fears with an unbreakable swagger, our boy mentally calculates that this is the ultimate golden ticket to track down those exact beasts that jumped him before. However, his fantasy of a lone wolf villain training arc gets completely nuked the moment Dunkel forcefully invites himself to the party under the Duke's strict commands. Smash cut to a jagged wilderness base camp, directly beneath a sea of stars. Here, the young lord quietly boils with sheer irritation, while his aggressively cheerful bodyguard totally vibes with the scenery. Pushing past the aggravation, our main character mercifully passes a sizzling, perfectly charred steak kebab to his unwanted sidekick. Instantly struck with panic over forcing royalty to cook for him, the knight nervously scrambles to volunteer for the baseline survival duties. Klein merely locks his gaze onto his own meal, allowing a suffocating, intensely disappointed silence to choke the atmosphere, before simply pointing at a violently scorched, completely unidentifiable chunk of carbon lying in the dirt. He delivers a savage reality check, stating that standing there like a statue is the greatest contribution he could possibly make. In a massive comedic twist, the supposedly legendary Knight Commander Dunkel is genuinely garbage at fundamental outdoor survival, like hunting or grilling, forcing the humiliated warrior into a spiral of pathetic apologies to our teenage hero. Dunkel drops his gaze in absolute disgrace over his culinary war crime, but Klein just coolly waves away the disaster. Motioning to toss another round of meat on the fire, the young master savors his perfectly seared feast. Klein silently muses that after spending over 10 years constantly outmaneuvering the allied night orders, camping in the untamed wilderness honestly feels like a luxury retreat. Right across the blazing campfire, Dunkel remains absolutely speechless, deeply scrutinizing the unbelievably skilled teenager. Breaking the heavy silence, the Knight Commander finally voices his thoughts. He points out that between concealing his monstrous swordsmanship and displaying such a bloodthirsty streak back in the arena, our protagonist is entirely built different from anyone his age. Out of nowhere, the bodyguard casually drops a massive bombshell, floating the insane theory that his young ward might actually be the reborn soul of the mythical demon lord Archimond. Our guy instantly hits maximum panic mode, yelling at Dunkel to keep that absolute garbage out of any priest's earshot, all while internally sweating bullets over how utterly doomed he'd be. Although the knight just brushes it off with a chuckle. You really cannot blame bro for freaking out. Archimond was a literal nightmare who transformed tens of millions of northerners into a massive zombie legion. So, catching that kind of allegation is essentially a one-way ticket straight to the church's execution block. But before the thick awkwardness can fade, a vicious howling gale rips through their camp, whipping the campfire out of control. Dunkel scans the area in sheer bewilderment, guessing that a severe storm is rolling in, but his young lord immediately kills that hopeful theory. Every ounce of lighthearted energy evaporates instantly as a suffocating, lethal shadow sweeps across our protagonist's face. With one pupil burning a sinister yellow, he ruthlessly commands his knight to never, under any circumstances, bring up that reincarnation talk again. Utterly stunned by the terrifying shift in demeanor, Dunkel tilts his head, realizing something is deeply wrong. Suddenly, a bone-chilling shriek pierces the pitch-black wilderness, forcing the dark-haired bodyguard to instantly unsheath his colossal blade. The scene snaps from their tense camp to a neighboring village in the dead of night, where the gruesome sounds of a massacre are already echoing. Pure pandemonium has consumed the dirt roads as horrified locals sprint for their survival, frantically screaming about an undead onslaught. Right on cue, A massive wave of decaying blue-eyed walkers bursts from the shadows, looking completely starved for fresh meat. But not on the Knight Commander's watch. He steps up to the plate and unleashes a colossal blazing golden slash that instantly reduces the entire front line of the rotting horde to absolute dust. Yet mid-swing pure dread washes over the Knight, as he realizes he left his supposedly defenseless foe. IP totally exposed. Exposed? Well, it turns out our guy does not need a bodyguard, as he effortlessly cleaves a towering shadow beast in two with a radiant purple aura. Glaring down at the bloody mess, the young lord coldly questions why his protector is just standing there frozen. Barking a strict order, Klein forces the Knight to secure the remaining civilians, snapping Dunkel back to reality. The bloody war zone finally falls dead silent as the final severed head hits the soil with a sickening thud. Gasping for air, the traumatized survivors ask for their rescuers' identities only to freeze in pure shock when Dunkel proudly declares they are standing before a high-ranking Rhineland noble. Skipping the polite small talk, the commander immediately interrogates the crowd about exactly when these walking corpses first appeared, while the Knight grills the shaken locals. Our protagonist investigates the rotting bodies, instantly spotting the exact same necromancy that jumped him back in the woods. A trembling villager stutters out the horrifying timeline, revealing that this living hell started 2 months ago, right after the regional count, completely sealed off the mines. That grim detail hits like a truck when the man confesses that every single beast they just butchered was actually one of their missing neighbors. This twisted revelation leaves even Klein visibly shaken. Without warning, the devastated survivor lunges forward violently, grabbing the young aristocrat by the collar. Pure desperation takes over as the man furiously shakes Bro, crying out to know if he actually represents the ruling family, forcing a panicked Dunkel to quickly intervene. Thrashing against the Knight's heavy grip, the villager unloads 2 solid months of boiling rage, disgusted that the Duke's administration ignored their desperate cries for backup, only to waltz in now to play hero. And as if this public relations disaster was not catastrophic enough, the guy points at the chopped-up zombie in the dirt and drops a soul-crushing bombshell, screaming that our boy just effortlessly slaughtered his father. Cue the heartbreaking flashback sequence. The weeping local screams that his old man was just an honest miner grinding day and night, only to be turned into a glowing-eyed undead pawn in this twisted game. Cursing the absolute injustice of it all, he wails in agony, demanding to know why his family was condemned to such a sick fate. Yet our protagonist just stares back with zero emotional warmth, calmly speaking up to snap the guy out of his hysteria. Suddenly, Bro makes the entire atmosphere run terrifyingly cold. His gaze flares a deadly violet as he snaps at the guy to zip it, demanding to know how any of this mess is on his hands. That suffocating bloodlust pouring off the young aristocrat completely paralyzes the mourning local, choking off his words. With a freezing azure spark igniting in his pupil, Klein lays down the cold hard truth. He wasn't the one who twisted these folks into abominations, so the man better redirect that fury at the real mastermind. Right before Dunkel can jump in to cool things down, our boy effortlessly conjures a cluster of ghostly sapphire fire. The Knight Commander just watches utterly dumbfounded as the young lord begins weaving an incredibly complex spell, ordering the tormented souls to chase his beacon. Pure terror washes over the bystanders when the slaughtered ghouls suddenly begin to spasm. Standing tall, Klein declares his true title and swears to carry out their final wishes. Cloaked in a raging cyclone of arcane embers, this absolute boss reaches out, commanding the dead to rise up with him. Sprawled in the mud, the shattered corpses react in a heartbeat, pumping out a fierce, unearthly azure glow. The crowd stares in absolute shock as shimmering phantom silhouettes peel away from the decaying flesh permanently liberated from their zombified cages. Drifting skyward, the spirit of the worn-out miner looks totally serene, murmuring secrets that only the dark mage catches. Anchored beneath the rising wisps of light, our guy silently tunes into the muffled, "Thanks to the crossing souls." With a heavy, respectful nod, Klein quietly takes on the local's dying plea, showing that a real heart actually beats under that icy shell. Staring from the fringes, Dunkel is internally losing his mind, while a townsman frantically points out this dazzling display is actually soul resonance. He explains that our protagonist just effortlessly dropped a 200-year-old secret art used to cleanse the fallen during a northern epidemic, like it was just some cheap parlor trick. Buried in the mob, a heartbroken man locks eyes with his dad's ghost, finally scoring that agonizingly overdue sense of closure. Wearing a beautifully calm smile, the elderly spirit gently fades into a flurry of neon blue ash. A jaw-dropping meteor shower of energy rockets up into the cosmos, leaving the plaza dead quiet and totally wiped of monsters. Hours later, looming over the sleepy village, a pale moon cuts through the fog. Way down in the valley, our 2 wanderers are already hitting the trail, their boots grinding over the jagged gravel. Pushing through the pitch-black woods, the vibe between Klein and his protector is chillingly professional. As they tackle the brutal incline, that memory of the local guiding them toward the off-limits mine keeps chewing at Dunkel's brain. Shattering the quiet, the warrior finally demands to know what those radiant phantoms actually muttered to our lead. Klein doesn't even blink, shrugging the question away like they were just discussing a passing rainstorm. He claims the spirits were merely tossing out a quick thanks for their premium ticket to the great beyond. Oh, and they also pleaded for some ruthless bloody vengeance, a minor footnote that leaves his escort absolutely paralyzed. Shell-shocked Dunkel just quietly echoes the word, letting that massive bombshell hang thick in the freezing midnight wind. Even when they get their boots moving again, that nightmare image of Klein's blazing pupil and the sinister Archiman rumor won't stop tormenting the knight's sanity. The lethal screech of steel leaving a scabbard kills their trek, as Dunkel rips out his sword, completely fed up with the mind games from his shady partner. Aiming that colossal broadsword dead at our boy's skull, the guardsman aggressively demands to know exactly who he's traveling with. But Klein just plants his feet, looking barely annoyed by the immediate threat on his life. Yet to figure out how they wound up in this fatal stare-down, Dunkel's brain rewinds to the afternoon. A significantly younger Klein stepped back onto the Rhineland Manor, practically a stranger to the very maids who raised him. Getting locked away in a cloister for 7 straight years is bound to mess a kid up. But our dude dialed his dark phase up to 11 by straight-up introducing himself as the damn fiend Archimand, and wildly enough, that wasn't even the most alarming warning sign. That crown belonged to his glare, hollow pitch-black voids that made the kid look less like a scarred victim and way more like a living, breathing sleep paralysis demon. And it definitely didn't take long for the real nightmare to kick off, starting with a stomach-turning find that completely shattered the mansion's quiet vibe. A gut-wrenching shriek tore through the kitchen when the panicked maids tripped over the very first butchered cat. Then a second carcass popped up in the courtyard, followed closely by a third one just 24 hours later, sending a tsunami of pure paranoia rippling across the property. By the time that brutal kill tally hit 7, this twisted little trend was way too loud to ignore. Those terrified rumors instantly snowballed into pure mass panic, with the whole staff violently pointing fingers at the boy's tainted heritage and his confessions of being Archimand. But even while drowning in those frantic witch hunts, our protagonist stayed chillingly cool, just silently gazing out of the glass, like all that screaming drama was just white noise. Spying on him from the shadows, Dunkel tried to logic his way out of the horror, desperately telling himself that a simple kid couldn't possibly be pulling off such twisted magic. That innocent belief held up perfectly until one chilling moonlit night. Out of nowhere, a sharp creak of the floorboards violently sliced through the dead silence, instantly throwing the eagle-eyed knight into full combat mode. Poking his head down the shadowy corridor, he caught the young master slipping into the pitch-black night, clutching a solitary lantern. Violent gusts of wind tore through the twisted branches, painting a seriously sinister backdrop for whatever twisted crime the kid was about to pull off. Gripping his flickering light in the absolute void, our boy tiptoes ahead, looking incredibly suspicious and practically confirming every single one of the knight's craziest theories. Stalking just a few steps back, Dunkel mirrors the kid's every move down the cold stone walkway. He is playing the highest stakes game of midnight hide and seek, desperate to uncover what flavor of pure evil was on tonight's menu. A solitary crow screeched from atop the rusted iron gates, signaling their dead-end arrival at the ancestral graveyard. Lurking deep within the darkness, the seasoned warrior could not wrap his head around why the young lord would wander into a cemetery at the witching hour. Swallowed up by the crumbling gravestones, Dunkel weighed his options about moving in closer right, as stomach-churning wet squelches ripped through the gloom. In a flash, his eyes ballooned with pure, unadulterated terror. Exploding out of his cover, he roared at the kid, totally bracing himself to bust up a twisted occult ritual. Yet instead of stumbling onto a bloody demonic sacrifice, he spotted the kid tenderly swaddling completely mutilated cat corpses in spotless white linen. Stuttering in total bewilderment, Dunkel aggressively demanded answers, but Klein did not even flinch, casually dropping that he was just giving the poor strays a dignified burial. This absolute savage smoothly highlighted the nasty sores covering their bodies, correctly diagnosing a wildly contagious plague that slaughtered animals but left humans totally untouched. Delicately wrapping up yet another casualty, our guy broke it down, leaving them rotting out in the open would just lure in hungry scavengers rapidly spreading. The deadly infection even faster. Cold sweat dumped down the knight's brow as he begged the aristocrat to dump this absolutely filthy chore on the maid's warning that it would trash his pristine hands. Without skipping a single beat, the young lord coolly fired back that somebody had to step up and take full ownership of this brutal reality. Those soft, heavy words completely rocked the battle-hardened veteran to his core, violently shattering every single demonic rumor he ever bought into, yanking us straight back to the freezing present. That exact same ironclad sense of duty rings loud inside Dunkel's head as he presses his razor-sharp blade right up against Klein's throat, frantically demanding the absolute truth about who he really is. Rather than freaking out over the lethal steel digging into his neck, Argyne completely brushes off the aggressive interrogation and effortlessly slaps his personal bodyguard with a random pop quiz regarding the Rhineland family's legendary founding motto. Blindsided by the totally out-of-nowhere trivia, the wildly sweating knight commander legitimately plays the good student flawlessly, reciting the ancient proverb about raw actions, holding way more weight than noble bloodlines. RG slickly weaponizes those very words, highlighting exactly how a lowly dirt-poor peasant leveled up to knight captain, and how the hated son of a foreign outsider managed to cheat death for this long. With the massive broadsword still hovering a hair away from his jugular, the aristocratic teen nonchalantly tosses his ultimate survival right into his protector's lap. Even as Klein boldly double dares him to swing the damn sword, Dunkel's brain aggressively rewinds back to that shockingly pure memory of the kid handing those infected, rotting stray cats a dignified send-off. The suffocating, deadly tension finally shatters as the captain sluggishly drops his heavy weapon, choosing that today is definitely not the day he catches a treason charge. Spinning around, the grizzled fighter openly confesses he is still wrestling with some serious trust issues, and is not completely buying this whole flawless choir boy routine. Still, he aggressively swears his absolute allegiance to the second young master of the Rhineland estate, loudly trashing the absolute garbage theory that he is currently babysitting the living devil of the continent. Never one to kill a brilliantly dramatic vibe, our hero just smoothly tosses back a thank you for the compliment, brushing off the terrifying near-death standoff like it was just a tiny speed bump. We violently smash cut from the blistering snowstorm straight into a whole new flavor of nightmare. A pitch-black, deeply unsettling underground mineshaft vibrating with sinister deep earth rumbles. A violent explosion of fire slashes through the absolute dark as a wooden torch flares to life, finally hooking us up with some painfully necessary light. Washing over the filthy ground, the dancing orange sparks expose a ridiculously gigantic, horrific skull. It instantly sets a beautifully morbid mood for their little underground field trip. Steering by the fiery glow, the two-man squad pushes deeper into the guts of the cave, casually trampling over massive heaps of ancient crumbling skeletons. Dunkel violently scrunches his face at the heavy, unmistakable reek of decaying meat, a totally lovely little atmospheric detail that Klein deadpan verifies. Squinting down the endless throat of the tunnel, they catch a gorgeous little welcoming party of shadowy, twitching zombies moaning deep in the shadows. Instead of sprinting for the absolute hills, our boy casually pops a squat, runs a lightning-fast headcount of the rotting horde, and begins muttering spells as his palms violently erupt with aggressively sparking neon blue magic. Spitting a wildly edgy, cold-blooded one-liner about gifting them fresh meat to absolutely obliterate their rivals, Bro literally rips 3 terrifying neon-eyed bone warriors right out of the thin air. Completely blindsided by the massive flex, Dunkel snaps his neck around, staring at the raw explosion of forbidden dark arts. Our protagonist does not burn a single second, commanding his fresh undead hit squad to dive headfirst into the pitch-black abyss. Launching with nightmare-inducing velocity, the skeletal fighters completely blur forward, their piercing hyper-yellow pupils burning toxic light trails through the fog. The twitching meat sacks ahead barely even get a chance to flinch as the deafening stomp of Rapidu. Bone-on-rock footsteps violently ricochets throughout the massive cavern. In the blink of an eye, the magical summons absolutely shred through the rotting enemy front line. Luminous blue blades carve through the pale monstrosities like butter. Completely mind-blown by these elite Tiros familiars, the Knight Commander can hardly wrap his head around how such overpowered skeletons even exist. This prompts Klein to shrug and casually drop that Dalton's mercenaries had the exact same reaction. Ruthless and completely unstoppable. The bony front line presses their savage attack, tearing through the remaining groaning threats without breaking a sweat. With the bloody corridor momentarily secure, Dunkel sweeps his torch forward, urging the young master to press deeper into the abyss. But the second they take a step forward, a deafening earth-shattering roar violently rattles the cavern walls, freezing the veteran warrior dead in his tracks. Dread bleeding into his voice, he frantically warns our boy that they are hopelessly outgunned, guessing that at least 40 more abominations are stampeding their way. Completely unfazed by the suicidal odds, Klein merely lifts a single hand, whispering an ancient incantation to shatter the seals on the freshly slaughtered corpses. The dark stone floor erupts in a blinding glow as he orders the tormented spirits to awaken and swear loyalty to a brand new king. While the captain stares in absolute shock, Klein points out he is just recycling dead enemies into a fresh hit squad. Our guy literally brushes off, summoning a nightmarish battalion of neon blue skeletons as nothing more than a textbook strategy for battling rival necromancers. Sweeping his gaze across his newly resurrected front line, Klein gives a cocky flick of his wrist, signaling that they finally possess the raw firepower to mount a devastating counterattack. Yet the absolute second those words leave his lips, a monstrous ear-piercing shriek rips through the darkness, announcing the arrival of the main monster swarm. Without wasting a single breath, the young master barks out a ruthless order for a full-throttle charge. He commands the veteran to keep up as they sprint headfirst into the pitch-black maw of the cave. The skeletal vanguard rockets forward like a blur, rapidly closing the gap with the creeping shadows lurking in the gloom. Before the brain-dead beast can even blink, radiant blue greatswords butcher their front lines with terrifying surgical precision. Jet-black ichor violently paints the stone walls as the unyielding familiars hack the enemy to pieces, completely suffocating any chance of a counterstrike. Riding that lethal momentum, Klein snaps out rapid-fire tactical orders, commanding his rearguard to utterly obliterate whatever resistance is left. The suffocating pressure of their blitz immediately shatters the swarm's defenses, reducing the horrific beasts into massive piles of shredded meat. Agonizing screeches bounce off the cavern walls, while the armored undead mercilessly execute absolutely anything that breeds in their path. Witnessing this one-sided bloodbath unfold, Dunkel's brain is doing backflips. Skeletons are universally known as bottom-barrel garbage mobs, yet these specific units are striking with gut-wrenching speed and elite swordsmanship. This isn't just random mindless hacking and slashing. These familiars are operating with the razor-sharp coordination of a Black Ops military squad. As the final monster drops lifelessly to the floor, a chilling dead silence blankets the gore-drenched tunnel, interrupted only by the nasty sound of dripping ichor. when the chaotic dust settles, our absolute menace of a hero and his faithful guard stand without a single scratch on them, completely surrounded by an ocean of butchered bodies, still dripping sweat over the absolute insanity of casually annihilating an army 4 times their size. The Knight Commander snaps out of his daze when Klein suddenly declares they are ditching their undead army right here, staring the Knight dead in the soul. Our boy demands blind ride-or-die loyalty for whatever incredibly shady stunt he is about to pull off next. With those highly questionable demands settled, the two plunge even deeper into the suffocatingly black mine, where Dunkel nervously tries to cut the heavy tension by casually mentioning how insanely far underground they have wandered. Right in the middle of his sentence, a random warm droplet splatters violently against the Knight's cheek. Wiping it off, his blood runs cold at the sight of fresh crimson, just as an incredibly fragile weeping voice bounces through the shadows. Frantically swinging his torch upwards, the panicked commander screams out to the hidden survivor, except instead of begging to be saved, the mutilated victim only sobs for the sweet, merciful release of death. The dancing flames suddenly reveal a nightmare-inducing cavern where dozens of mangled, human bodies are dangling viciously from the ceiling by their chained wrists. Utterly sickened by the chorus of suffering moans, Dunkel finally connects the horrifying dots. These victims are the vanished villagers, being brutally milked as living, breathing batteries to fuel forbidden dark magic. Suddenly, crisp footsteps click out from the pitch-black shadows as a mysterious figure steps into the light, slow clapping the Knight's perfect detective work. A hooded woman nonchalantly reveals that mass manufacturing an army of the undead demands an endless mountain of premium, freshly harvested corpses. Disgusted by her totally psychotic logic, our hero's eyes blow wide open in shock, slowly peeling back her dark hood. The bizarre stranger confesses she honestly never dreamed of crossing paths with him in this filthy hellhole. Flashing a deeply arrogant smirk, the fiery-haired necromancer formally bows to him, addressing him by his highly classified, bone-chilling alias, the Devil of the Continent, Lord Archimond. Our boy's stomach absolutely drops to the floor, realizing his ultra-clandestine demonic alter ego is somehow completely public gossip down in this random middle-of-nowhere cave. A sudden flashback hits him like a truck. Back in the day, the title of necromancer literally just meant weirdos who talk to spirits too, receiving holy visions. But that tranquil illusion was ripped to shreds forever on that fateful day, twisting them into entities of pure dread. History now fears the Archiman incident, a horrific cataclysm where the continent's ultimate villain unleashed an infinite, relentless legion of tens of millions of walking corpses. That monstrous swarm obliterated everything it touched, halting only when the mythical champion Burkel Rhineland finally slaughtered Archimond for good. In the aftermath, arrogant fools obsessed with that sinister power desperately tried copying it, but their research crashed into a massive wall, maxing out at basic low-level corpse revival. Meaning today's so-called necromancers have devolved into nothing but pathetic third-rate tricksters playing with dead bodies. Snapping right back to the current timeline, the mysterious newcomer flashes a wicked grin at the guy standing across from her. She formally announces herself as Pale, a true necromancer, before dropping his real blood-chilling title. A freezing gale shrieks across the jagged wasteland, setting a lethal stage for a brutal showdown between the crimson-haired woman and our boys. Dunkel breaks into a cold sweat hearing that forbidden alias, but our main guy does not even flinch. His icy gaze drills into the looming threat. Without a single warning, Pale erupts, flooding the area with a monstrous wave of mana and cloaking her body in a violent crimson aura that violently vibrates the atmosphere. Tracking that electric power, Klein instantly connects the dots. She is weaving raw magic straight into her garments, a terrifying top-tier skill, completely exclusive to her twisted breed. Boiling over from the blatant insult, Dunkel snatches his blade from its sheath, stepping up fiercely to shield his young lord. He loudly warns the witch to back off, and never lump his master in with absolute garbage like Archimond. Pale merely shuts her eyes, flashing a cocky, amused smirk, casually shrugging off the knight's fiery rage with a heavily sarcastic apology directed at the young heir of Rhineland. Completely unbothered by her theatrical display, our protagonist glares right back, confirming that her strange, intoxicating magic proves she is 100% a necromancer exactly like he is. Pale narrows her eyes right back at him, visibly derailed by our boy's bizarre aura. Her words stumble as she desperately hunts for a nice way to point out that his current weapon choice does not exactly give off classic dark sorcerer energy. She flat out grills him for carrying cold, hard steel, her voice drifting away as she glues her eyes to the razor-sharp sword strapped to his waist. I mean, it's practically the biggest joke of a weapon a dark mage could ever wield. Completely done with her sick, twisted games. Dunkel gets right in her face, screaming to know what the hell happened to the abducted townsfolk and exactly who pulled her strings. Her eyes drop. She brushes off the knight's furious shouting like it's nothing but white noise. An icy word slipped from her lips. True masters of the dark arts don't rely on pathetic, ordinary weapons. A heavy, choking tide of pitch-black aura erupts straight from her throat while she boasts about her absolute, undisputed reign over the grave. The spiraling shadow cloud balloons outward, uncovering the gut-wrenching reality of the vanished civilians. Every single one of them has been melted down into suffering phantoms locked inside her curse. A tortured soul violently breaches the inky surface, its rotting visage permanently locked in an endless bone-chilling shriek. Vile mana ruthlessly bursts right out of the dead husk's jaw, proving just how horrifyingly complete her domination really is. thrusting her palm up toward the crimson heavens. Pale conducts a colossal twisted orchestra of pure agony, chaining thousands of wailing spirits to her every whim using thick shadowy vines. Flashing a wicked arrogant grin, she extends an illuminated hand, swearing to give our duo a front row seat to her true capabilities. Squeezing every ounce of that tortured aura into one violently throbbing orb, she gets ready to unleash the absolute peak of her twisted sorcery. Out of nowhere, the sphere brutally detonates, and a gigantic mangled arm forcefully rips its way into the physical world, hovering right above the shredding muscle. The Mad Witch joyfully proclaims the grand entrance of her life's crowning achievement. The bedrock splinters the second it lands as a towering, sickeningly mutated monstrosity, stitched together entirely from the mashed-up corpses of her victims, materializes completely onto the dirt. Sweating bullets, the devoted knight struggles to even comprehend the mind-numbing size of the terror standing before them, while our protagonist quietly calculates their next move. Despite surviving countless bloody war zones, Dunkel's brain straight up short-circuits as the reflection of this unnatural freak completely dominates, his trembling retinas locking on to its gigantic center pupil. The panicked swordsman internally shouts out Cyclops, because let's be real, a massive fleshy jigsaw puzzle of human body parts is just way too much of a mouthful when you're about to bite the dust. Stroking the repulsive lump of meat like it's a pampered puppy, Pale sweetly apologizes to her little baby for keeping it chained up, before casually requesting one tiny favor. Her loving voice evaporates in a heartbeat, swapped out for a dead cold, vicious order to squash our guys into a bloody paste on the gravel. Following the command instantly, the freakish titan stomps its mammoth leg down with enough raw power to shatter the earth itself. Letting out an ear-piercing shriek, the towering mass of decaying flesh stampedes across the dirt, morphing the entire war zone into a lethal death trap. Pure terror flashes across Dunkel's face when he notices this hulking abomination, sprinting with a terrifying speed that totally defies its massive bulk. Frantic to keep his master alive, the seasoned warrior dives right into the chaos, reaching out to yank our boy away from the monster's crushing trajectory. Yet rather than playing the helpless victim, Klein smoothly raises one arm toward his panicking knight. With a swift thrust, our guy literally throws his own defender out of the way, sending a totally confused Dunkel sailing clear of the kill zone. Absorbing the absolute worst of the beast's horrific impact, he transforms himself into a living barricade to spare his faithful servant. A massive shockwave tears through the barren earth the exact second this mutated Cyclops slams into him with earth-shattering force. As the heavy smoke clears from the battlefield, the noble heir remains anchored to the ground. Planted firmly on his knees inside the blasted crater, crimson spills from his lips, but this total boss refuses to blink, staring down the nightmare with a glare that could melt steel. Snarling with savage intent, the giant undead monstrosity shadows its supposedly defeated target, gearing up to deliver the fatal blow. It raises a monstrous foot as big as a truck, completely planning to flatten our hero right into the dirt. The grotesque heel drops like an absolute meteor, packing enough lethal momentum to instantly crush his skull. A split second before disaster strikes, a gleaming sword shreds through the falling meat, blasting thick black blood straight across the sky. Dunkel rockets back into the center of the clash, his face contorted in pure rage as he screams at the creature to back the hell away. Leaping into the air, the elite swordsman rips a vicious tear straight across the mutant's leg to defend his master's life. Still kneeling in the rubble, Klein stares up in absolute shock, witnessing his sworn protector lay it all on the line to save him back. Even Pale stops her arrogant smirking, utterly stunned by the warrior's insane flash of deadly agility. The rotting Goliath stumbles backward, while unleashing an ear-piercing shriek, buying Dunkel the perfect window to touch down smoothly on the shattered earth. But that split second of victory gets instantly ruined by the creepy echo of a slow, mocking clap ringing out across the wasteland. The crimson-haired dark mage smacks her hands together with a totally smug grin, laughing right in the face of the knight's reckless bravery. She effortlessly highlights his massive mistake, right as the disgusting threads of rotting muscle start violently stitching themselves back together inside. The creature's gaping bloody gash. The knight stares in pure terror as the colossal limb reconstructs itself in a split second. It hits him hard. His deadliest attack couldn't even leave a scratch on her so-called twisted creation. Fully recovered and boiling with rage, the gigantic mutation brings down a catastrophic smash meant to flatten them, both into the dirt. Staring down the Grim Reaper, Dunkel completely steals his nerves. He suddenly remembers how a completely powerless young master recklessly dove straight into absolute peril just to protect him. Burning with fierce devotion, he launched himself right at the dropping meaty hammer, fully prepared to sacrifice his own life. Ripping his blade toward the sky with every ounce of remaining strength, Dunkel bitterly regrets ever thinking this heroic kid could actually be the ultimate evil of their world. Propelled by heavy remorse, he fires off a dazzling storm of golden aura slashes, desperate to cleanse the absolute disgrace of second-guessing his lord. Bellowing a fierce war cry, he bets his entire existence on this very moment, blasting relentless shockwaves directly into the hulking brute's mutated skin. Yet paralyzing despair quickly takes over, and when he sees the mutant's deep cuts, stitched right back into place like it was absolutely nothing. An earth-shattering tremor tears across the ground as the sewn-up monstrosity brushes aside, his deadliest combo without a single flinch. Vaulting high into the sky, the warrior angles himself directly over the snarling titan for one last reckless gamble. He zeroes in on his mark, knowing a blindingly quick slice to the throat is the sole option to beat that. insane regeneration ability. Channeling every single shred of his glowing energy straight into the steel, Dunkel lets out a deafening howl that literally trembles the dirt beneath them. The blazing weapon plummets with bone-chilling velocity, locked right onto the mutant beast's throat. But out of nowhere, a colossal fleshy limb completely blindsides him mid-swing, utterly crushing his downward drive. Before the stunned warrior can even react to the vicious block, the behemoth smacks him right out of the clouds with skull-snapping power. A massive deafening boom instantly blows out a huge crater right on impact, kicking up a savage storm of crushed rocks and thick dirt across the wasteland. As the heavy fog settles, the faithful protector is violently pinned deep into a ruined stone wall knocked completely cold. The heavy pull of gravity finally kicks in, and his lifeless form slides right out of the smashed rubble with a horrifying crack. He drops pathetically to the ground, absolutely mangled, crushed, and completely done for. Gazing at this absolute bloodbath, Pale actually starts weeping with pure joy, totally mesmerized by the flawless, horrifying beauty of her twisted creation. A fleeting flashback exposes her terrifying addiction to the dark arts, pushing her to execute an endless string of stomach-churning experiments, littering her wake with a chilling gallery of suspended dead bodies before the memory dissolves. And as that colossal abomination towers over the current battlefield, the sinister legacy of its birth screams loudly, cementing the fact that she engineered an unstoppable mutation, jolting straight back into the immediate slaughter. The crimson-haired sorceress thrusts her palm skyward, totally blinded by her own sick narcissism. A hysterical cackle erupts from her lungs, boasting loudly that even the mythical Archimon could never imagine crafting a masterpiece this flawless, a deranged, victorious spark flashing in her eyes. She is absolutely convinced her raw genius has eclipsed the most notorious shadow wizard to ever live. To drive her cocky rant home, the hideous gargantuan tightens its crushing grip around the knocked-out knight. A stomach-churning crunch of shattering armor rings across the barren dirt as Dunkel dangles, totally lifeless and vulnerable. Yet just before the monster can squeeze the life out of him, steady boot steps slice right through the heavy silence, joined by a relaxed tone effortlessly diagnosing the freak's internal magic pathways. Pale widens her eyes in pure bewilderment as our protagonist perfectly decodes the precise death magic equations holding the rotting patchwork together, casually walking straight toward the giant flesh mountain. Klein coolly remarks that slashing at its bulky muscles is completely pointless, when shattering one solitary heart will kill the thing on the spot. Swiping the blood from his jawline, his gaze flares with a dangerous violet aura as he drops the ultimate question. Where exactly is that core hiding? Planting his feet firmly, his brain maps out the hidden reality. A Cyclops' weak spot does not just rest lazily in the center of its chest. Rather, his strategic blueprint shows the radiant energy sphere endlessly shifting inside the Titan's gigantic body, pumping through its veins like a runaway pulse. Catching his words, Pal merely shoots back a cocky smirk, laughing at his logic, because sniping a roaming target inside a Leviathan is practically a physical impossibility. Flicking her wrist down with supreme haughtiness, Pale loudly boasts to her challenger that this unbreakable juggernaut is the grand masterpiece crowning her entire existence. Hoisting a palm buzzing with lethal magenta sparks, she icily brushes off his clever deductions, swearing that brainpower is utterly worthless against her corrupt genius. Obeying her will, the mammoth horse slams its giant heel aggressively toward the dirt, aiming to flatten our hero's shadowy outline into dust. However buried within the ear-splitting boom and exploding rubble, Klein doesn't even flinch, calmly mocking her pathetic idea of a threat. A sudden flood of memories washes over him, pulling his mind right back to an era where he butchered thousands of these very same grotesque beasts. Despite the massive danger hovering above, he flawlessly traces the glowing twisted weak points hidden deep inside. The monster's core guided by centuries of forged combat instincts. Snapping to the present, his eyes ignite with a violent purple glow as he thrusts his sword upward, letting raw battle sense guide his blade for a flawless strike. Pale chokes on a gasp, her single crimson eye stretching wide in pure, unfiltered terror. Frozen in dread, she can only watch as a monstrous tide of violet aura shreds violently through the atmosphere. With one single apocalyptic slash, he cleaves her so-called invincible masterpiece perfectly in half. Its pulsating, elusive core explodes on contact, bursting into a blinding rain of jagged crystal shards, swallowed by the thick black ash of her obliterated beast. The necromancer stutters helplessly, utterly crushed by this effortless flex of absolute dominance. Flashing a wicked smirk, Klein's aura warps into the horrifying silhouette of his former armored self, brutally suggesting she find a new hobby in her next life.